The stranger gently touched her hand while the heroine was sleeping. Why were they here? Now, the question echoed in his head, and no one knew the answer. Clothes lay scattered on the floor near the fireplace, the flames dancing on the fabric, bringing a semblance of life into the chaos. She slept, smiling through her sleep, feeling his warmth like a saving beacon in the night darkness. His wheat-colored hair barely touched her cheek, and his strong arms held her securely in his embrace. The fire in the fireplace was dying down, casting strange shadows on the walls of the room in this semi-darkness. Their breathing and embrace merged in unison, creating a melody of peace. The lady opened her eyes, feeling slightly disoriented, as if she had emerged from a deep sleep, leaving behind fragments of strange, unclear dreams somewhere in its depths. As soon as she woke up, images from the previous night appeared in her head, and she couldn't find an answer as to why she did it. The heroine did not understand how she could spend the night with a man about whom she knew absolutely nothing, only his name. The girl got out of bed and accidentally saw a wooden sign fall out of the pocket of a man's clothing onto the floor. It was an identification card that told of his identity. It definitely belonged to the man with whom she had spent the whole night. As soon as she looked at the ID, she immediately understood what kind of person fate had brought her together with. The heroine's name is Rosina Starout, a lady of a noble family that stood at the origins of the empire. It was from her family that empresses were chosen for centuries, and she was the eldest daughter of Count Starout. Unfortunately, the family came to an end. The count seemed like an honest, harmless man, pretended to be noble, and this is what came of it. The royal family did not even offer condolences at his funeral, and Count Starout left silently, as if nothing had happened. Someone said he died of exhaustion. It was so hard for him, and for those who have risen high, the fall is very painful, and his daughter had to listen to stupid gossip. Standing next to the coffin, the daughter told her father goodbye, telling him not to listen to anyone because he did everything to protect his beloved family. Now it was her turn to stand up for him. She regretted his death and felt a bitter loss, still not believing that it had happened. Her father left suddenly, leaving a gaping hole in her heart that it seemed nothing could fill. But life is always much more complicated, and after the death of Count Starout, life on the estate changed dramatically. Countess Marcella Starout and her younger sister Rania Starout did not seem upset at all, and were more concerned with the question of why the coachman had suddenly disappeared. Rosina tried to explain to her mother that they didn't have enough money to pay a large staff of servants, but the countess was sure that her daughter had deliberately fired the coachman right then. The lady asked if she really thought it was appropriate for them to go out into society now, after the loss of the earl and such a terrible tragedy. The countess was indignant, claiming that her daughter believed that her mother was only having fun, insisting that she was working to save the family by any means necessary. It was a great shame for the countess to hire a cab driver. She promised to resolve the issue with the coachman first upon her return, turned around and left. Rania even cried because her mother and her sister were now constantly arguing about money, and she was afraid that they had really become so poor. The countess always bought everything for her beloved daughter, and Rosina was a nobody to her. With each passing minute, the reality of her father's death became more and more tangible and more painful for the heroine, because he was her only support and encouragement. Every day Rosina spun like a squirrel in a wheel, but the debt still grew, and it seemed as if she was pouring water into a bottomless pit. Things couldn't go on like this. Rosina had to do something, otherwise the family would face ruin. While there was still time, it was necessary to act, because she had promised her father to take the reins of power into his own hands. Every day she worked until late at night, and from fatigue the lady's nose was constantly bleeding, which clearly indicated her poor condition. Walking along the gloomy corridor all alone, she decided to work until dawn, and then definitely go visit the landowner. As the lady passed one of the rooms from which the light was coming, she heard the countess talking about a proposal she had recently received from a young man. This young man's family was not noble, but very rich, and the countess said that he simply had to pay off their debts and provide for his family. The countess showed her daughter a photograph of the future groom, who looked like an old boar, and the lady was indignant that she was not ready to marry him under any circumstances. The countess suddenly smiled slyly and replied that her daughter had nothing to worry about, and that it would not be she who would marry him, but her older sister. Fortunately, Rosanna managed to hear the Countess's insidious plan, and it was unlikely that anyone would have asked her what she wanted. The Countess promised her daughters that they would be rich again and would no longer have to suffer, and the eldest would have to get married. The lady ran to her room, of course. Her sister was capricious and frivolous, and her mother, although she loved only her, still gave Rosina life. And after that, no matter how hard she tried for the family, this is what they repaid her with, Rosina cried, and could not believe that the Countess really wanted to sell her and call it marriage. Words, fragments of phrases, wove together into an alarming melody that cut her heart like a razor. Is it really possible that her life, her future, can be sold so easily for hard cash? Is it really possible that her feelings, her dreams, mean nothing in the eyes of those closest to her? For the first time in her life, Rosina understood that she had to fight for her freedom, for her happiness, and without thinking, she began to pack her suitcase. There was only one way out: to go to a place where no one knew Rosina, where her mother and sister didn't even like her, and from that moment on, that was the end of her stupid attachment. Having cut her luxurious hair, she sat in a wooden carriage with a coachman who took her to a distant place. For the first time in her life, she exhaled and realized that no one would be that support for her except herself. Standing in an unknown area, Rosina decided to go wherever her eyes led and never return. A whole month had passed since leaving home. The heroine had an ability that she kept secret. She could talk to animals, and for the daughter of a nobleman, this ability had no meaning. This was very useful to her during her journey. The animals told her where to go and if there was danger. Now Rosina lived freely under the guise of a boy traveler, dressed in youthful clothes and without her luxurious curls. She just wanted to live peacefully, but fate prepared a different path for her, and suddenly the lady saw scarlet bloodstains on one of the trees. The smell she smelled was unmistakable. This place was dangerous and Rosina had to leave. The birds began to sharply tug at her hair, foreshadowing a threat, and the lady paid attention to this sign. The little chipmunks desperately gnawed at her boots, and the heroine tried to figure out what had happened. She wanted to get away from here as quickly as possible, but the animals pulled her in another direction, as if they were leading her somewhere. The forest animals could not wish her any harm, and Rosina trusted them, soon finding herself near a huge tree. An unknown young man wearing only a cloak sat under a huge spreading oak tree. There were cuts and bruises on his bare chest, and he was probably in urgent need of help. The young man sat with his eyes closed. He did not react to anything and was possibly unconscious. He was breathing heavily, wheezing and making strange sounds, holding his chest, which was wounded. The young man woke up in fear, opened his huge blue eyes, and felt that someone was standing next to him. His consciousness was somewhere far away. He did not understand what was happening here and where he was. When the young man came to, the first thing he saw was Rosina's face, leaning over him with concern in her eyes. She didn't know him, had never seen him before, but something in his vulnerability touched the most sensitive strings of her soul. His eyes, clouded with pain and weakness, slowly focused on her in the depths of the forest. Her face seemed to him to be shining, like the face of an angel. Seeing that he was alive, Rosina sighed with relief, and the young man remained silent, trying to remember what had happened to him. Having handed over his lesson, the young man pushed her away in fear, mistaking the lady for a young man, and asked what he wanted. Rosina replied that she was just passing by and accidentally saw him sitting under a tree, unconscious. She wanted to stop the bleeding. The wound on the young man's chest was very deep, and he was almost suffocating. He held her hand tightly, knowing that if he let go now, the terrible attack would happen again. The lady wondered if she would have to watch him bleed to death, and if holding her hand would make him feel better. She desperately asked him to give her a chance to stop the bleeding, but she was unlikely to be able to heal him, so it was necessary to go for a doctor. Hearing this, the young man shouted, "There is no need to bring the doctor," as if she was talking about something terrible. Rosina asked him not to shout, realizing that the case was incredibly difficult and that she would have to cope on her own. The young man was still holding her hand, since she offered to at least go and get some clean cloth and healing ointment, and asked the stranger to wait here. There was no time to wait. He slowly, cautiously released her hand, letting out a heavy sigh. Rosina understood that he was scared, and the hero, trembling all over, asked if she would definitely return. The sun was already slowly setting. It would soon be dark, and Rosina promised that she would return as soon as possible. It seemed to him that he was drowning in darkness, and the only ray of light in this gloom was Rosina, whom he took for a boy. Rosina asked the stranger not to go anywhere, and even if it got dark, to be sure to wait for her here. She returned very quickly, approached the right tree, and noticed in horror that there was no one under it. Rosina spent enough money on medicine and bandages to last her a month on the road, and was it all going to go to waste now? Turning to the forest birds, she asked where the man who was sitting under the tree and bleeding had gone. He was very close, and this was not surprising, and it was unlikely that one could go far with such a wound. The young man asked how she managed to find him, since in such darkness he tried not to leave any traces behind him. Luckily, Rosina was good at finding people, and forest animals helped her with this. She asked to see the wounds, unless of course he intended to die, and the young man's entire body was covered with terrible deep cuts. The lady really wanted to help him. She tried her best to get all the necessary medications. Rosina carefully, trying not to cause unnecessary pain, applied the fragrant herbal ointment to the stranger's deep wound. The medicine took effect immediately. The young man shuddered, beads of sweat appeared on his forehead, and a muffled groan escaped his throat. Every gesture of hers was filled with sympathy and a desire to ease his suffering. Once the last layer of ointment was applied, Rosina carefully bandaged the wound with a clean cloth, being careful not to tie it too tightly so as not to cut off circulation. Being so close to a stranger for the first time, she noticed his strong build and muscles. He clenched his jaw, trying not to make a sound, and nodded slightly, as if encouraging her to continue. The stranger had incredibly blue eyes, and in the darkness their color seemed even deeper, like a bottomless blue sea. The young man immediately noticed her intent gaze and asked why he was looking like that. Rosina had to play the role of a boy so that he would never guess that in fact there was a girl sitting in front of him. The heroine jumped back sharply and declared that she simply wanted to know how he managed to get so badly injured. She couldn't tell anyone about him, even if this stranger didn't let her see the doctor, but Rosina only prayed that he wasn't a criminal. When the wound was treated and bandaged, the young man asked why the unknown boy with short hair decided to help him. However, if he were a dangerous person, the animals would have immediately warned the heroine about it, so she helped him just like that. The stranger called Rosina a strange fellow. She introduced herself to him by the male name Liedan, in order to hide the girl's true appearance. She carefully bandaged his hand and asked if he would tell her his name and why he was asking her. The young man, exhausted by the pain and stress he had endured, took a deep breath and called his name, Yaran. The heroine noticed that he hesitated for a long time, and he probably didn't want to introduce himself by his real name either. By the time Rosina had finished bandaging the wounds, it was already deep night, and the moon, breaking through the dense crowns of the trees, cast strange shadows, creating the feeling that the forest was coming to life. The bag contained all the necessary medications, which she had managed to obtain with great difficulty. The lady offered to let the young man take pills to restore lost blood, medicine to disinfect wounds, and tablets to relieve pain, and also bought food and clothes for him. Yaran asked if Liedan really wanted to leave, and the young lady, in the guise of a boy, admitted that she had done everything she could. His eyes showed torment mixed with disappointment, as if the departing Liedan was taking a piece of his soul with him. It was clear from Yaran's face that he was upset that Liedan was leaving. Suddenly he groaned from the pain that pierced him again. The lady was afraid that they had used the wrong medicines. It was the first time she had treated someone, and she was scared that she had bandaged the wound too tightly, because the young man screamed in pain throughout the forest. She leaned closer, her fingers touching his forehead, which was covered in cold sweat. Pain, like hot needles, pierced his body, leaving behind only exhaustion and emptiness. Liedan, in the young man's eyes, she was like a ray of light breaking through the thick darkness. Her presence brought him some relief, a feeling of warmth and care, so he asked her to stay. Yes, that night she couldn't just up and leave, deciding to take care of him for one more night and then part forever. The lady managed to find an inn where the heroes could settle down and spend the night peacefully in warmth. The young man asked how the short-haired boy managed to find this place, and in fact she found out from the animals, but he most likely would not believe her. Yaran thought, so the animals pointed out his location in the forest, and that's how she managed to find him wounded. It turned out that he believed her words, although the heroine was sure that it sounded simply absurd. People usually laughed at her or said that she was lying, often sending her to a doctor, claiming that something was wrong with her head and she was just trying to get attention. But for some reason, this young man did not see her as a liar when she said that she could talk to animals. Rosina was also surprised because it was the first time she saw a person who believed her words. It was already late at night, the heroes decided to go to bed, and the young man unexpectedly suggested that they lie down together because it was very cold here. The lady settled down on the floor, assuring him that everything was fine, but she understood that he simply wanted to take care of her in gratitude for saving her. Yaran asked in a quiet voice why Leodan was wandering around the world, and he must have delayed him, but the lady had no specific goal. She said that she just wanted to get as far away as possible, and that Yaran himself didn't look like a local at all. The young man came from a distant northern land called Hylar, and it was surprising how he ended up in this place. The northern lands are cold and inhospitable. There are many icy deserts with fierce, bloodthirsty monsters, and this is the kingdom of Hylar. Rosina asked how he ended up here, since the northern lands were incredibly far from this area. Yaran's hands trembled as soon as he remembered his native lands, and probably the reason why he left them stirred his heart. He didn't answer the lady's question. She was scared that she had asked something wrong, so after the silence, she simply decided to go to bed and not bother herself. Unexpectedly, he confessed that he had fled and that he was facing death in his native lands, from which he had to flee. As soon as he confessed this to Rosina, he began to tremble, not from the cold that penetrated the stone walls of their shelter, but from the horror that crawled like an icy snake through his veins. The lady took the young man's hand in support. Her touch was light, almost weightless, but there was a sense of firmness and unwavering determination in it. She felt a shudder run through the young man's body. She leaned towards him and quietly whispered that he should not be afraid. Her words, like a gentle breeze, touched his heart. He raised his head and met her gaze, and in his eyes there now burned a fire of hope, a fire that could illuminate even the darkest night. It was surprising, but the mysterious stranger was able to help him in the most difficult moment and melt his heart. After the intimate conversation, the lady fell asleep very quickly, but suddenly woke up in the middle of the night, as if struck by thunder. She jumped up and was surprised he was not on the bed, as if he had fallen through the ground. The door was open. It was pouring rain outside, and the lady had no idea what could have happened. Without thinking, she rushed to look for the wounded Yaran, and she couldn't even imagine where he could have disappeared to. She felt that with such wounds, he could hardly have gone far, since she had only slept for a short time. After walking a few meters from the hut, she was pierced by a cold horror. Bloody corpses of men in dark clothes lay on the grass, and a strong smell of blood was felt everywhere. In the semi-darkness of the night forest under the raindrops, she saw Yaran, who was fiercely holding one man by the throat, looking him intently in the eyes. He held it so coldly, like a real killer, a beast who had finally caught his victim. The young man's eyes were incredibly blue. In the darkness of the night, they looked like a real animal's gaze, and could it really be that Yaran killed these people? She had once seen such eyes on a hunt, a magical, ghostly glow in his eyes that belonged to a bloodthirsty monster. That time, the monster was a forest wolf, the snow-white king of the forest, whom her father had mercilessly captured. The lady's insides sank with fear, because she understood that this man could be very dangerous, and at that moment he saw her. Somewhere deep inside, she believed that she should run away from him without looking back, as far as possible, and forget about this meeting forever. Instead, she came closer to him, gently touched his face, and looked straight into his animal-like blue eyes. She didn't want to offend him. She felt like this man was her other half, the one she had been looking for a long time. These feelings were impossible to describe in words, but one thing could be said, as if she had finally met her one and only person. Her lips touched Yaran's lips as gently as if a butterfly's wing touched a flower petal. He felt her arms gently wrap around his neck, pulling him closer, and the kiss became deeper, more passionate, revealing previously unknown sensations. Not understanding how, under the influence of passion, they ended up in the hut on the bed, Yaran passionately embraced her. Each touch was an electric shock, awakening a wave of frantic desire in the body. He gently ran his hand over her cheek, enjoying the softness of the skin. In this whirlwind of feelings, passion and tenderness, despair and hope were mixed. They sought consolation, protection, confirmation in each other that they were alive, that their feelings were real. It turned out that Yaren had long ago realized that the person in front of him was not a young man at all, but a beautiful, charming girl. She looked closely into his eyes and saw that they had brightened again and no longer looked like those of an animal. Her breathing was ragged, echoing his own, and her heart beat in unison with the wild rhythm that engulfed them both. She responded in kind, hugging him tightly as if afraid that he would disappear, and all the clothes seemed like an unnecessary obstacle. In the morning, Rosina woke up from the bright sun shining through the cracks in the shutters. She opened her eyes and remembered the previous night, passion and Yaren with the eyes of a beast. It was at that moment that she found a wooden tablet that bore the royal family's coat of arms, and that meant only one thing. The man she spent the previous night with turned out to be from the royal order. Sitting with only a sheet on her naked body, she stared at the sign and still could not understand how this had happened. Most of all, she blamed herself for not realizing it earlier, because he was blonde, like all royalty. Before her father died, he asked his daughter to remember his words forever, but she did not know why. But her father considered it necessary to give her instructions before his death. A few days before his death, he asked his beloved daughter never to marry anyone of royal blood, never and for nothing. Therefore, Rosina never attended receptions at the royal palace, and besides, their family had already fallen out of favor with the king. If the royal family finds out that she is the heir of the star-out line, they will cause her even more problems. The most important thing is that the heroine will again be forced to live by her hated relatives, from whom she ran so far away. Having quickly dressed and collected all her things, the heroine left the hut and called for help from the forest birds, her faithful friends, and asked for help. She needed to get away from here as quickly as possible, as far away as possible, so that no one would even guess that she was here. As soon as she spoke these words loudly, a huge gray wolf appeared from the dense forest thicket. He stood quietly in front of the girl, as if silently saying that he was ready to help her and show her the right path. Since she smiled approvingly, forest animals, even predators, were always good friends to her. She sat astride a large wolf and he rushed like a whirlwind along impassable paths. Memories of the previous night were still floating around in the lady's head, but she decided not to attach any importance to it, to forget it and just move on. But will she be able to forget him? His eyes were the eyes of a beast, but they looked at her with such tenderness. On this short night she gave him everything she had, feelings, emotions, all of herself, and it was very good. The heroine wondered if members of the royal family really had any special abilities, and it turned out as if this man had bewitched her. When the wolf had already taken him very far, he stopped in the middle of the forest and asked where to go next. Rosina decided that she needed to move east, towards the sea, and today she realized one very important thing. In these lands, the influence of the royal family can never be avoided, and she will not be able to give up her title as the eldest daughter of Count Stareout. And in order to truly start a new life, she must leave the empire as soon as possible and leave her past behind forever. The heroine firmly decided to go to another empire called Astana, where no one would recognize her. The magnificent empire of Astana was rich in islands, but most importantly, it was hidden from the rest of the world by a complex sea route. It was a very rich empire, and there was as much gold as there was sand on the incredibly beautiful beaches. A very closed culture reigned here, preserving ancient traditions and not accepting outsiders. Getting there is known to be very difficult, especially for foreigners unless they are fluent in Astana. And now Rosina was standing in front of the man who checked every ID from people who wanted to get into the city. Having shown his documents, the man asked if it was true that she had come from the Herbert Empire. Thanks to her ability to communicate with animals, they easily taught her the local language, and smiling at the people, she took off her hood and confessed that she had long dreamed of visiting this beautiful island. She was able to learn the language of another empire without difficulty, and was incredibly glad that she was allowed through very quickly. First, she needed to find a place to stay, and then immediately go look for a doctor. Seasickness during a month-long voyage is no joke, and it continued to haunt the heroine even after she stepped ashore. She felt very nauseous, so the heroine turned to a doctor, but she certainly didn't expect to hear the diagnosis that she was pregnant. Her feet touched the warm, pleasant sand, and after the stunning news, she went to the sea to put her thoughts in order. Pregnant by a man she barely knows, and this child will be a stranger even here. But this is not the only worst thing. The child will be born without a father, and unfortunately she will have to raise him on her own. Rosina was afraid that her little baby would never be able to be happy, and it might be worth getting rid of him. The soft setting sun warmed with its rays, and the lady remembered her beloved father. As a child, she asked her parents many times to take her to the seaside. Her father always said that she would definitely see him next year. This went on every year for a very long time, until he suddenly died. For her mother, Rosina was never a full-fledged member of the family, and with all her soul she hated this little girl. Now the lady found herself alone in a foreign land, with a child from a completely unknown man under her heart. She cried bitterly, looking at the endless sea horizon, but still believed that now she was not alone. Her child is the new family she always dreamed of, even though things didn't turn out the way she imagined. No one has ever truly loved Rosina, and perhaps she will love this child with all her heart, and they will become the happiest family in the world. She remembered the eyes I had seen early, the blue eyes of a beast, and his incredibly charming smile. Sitting on her knees near the gentle sea, she wondered what he would say if he were nearby now and heard this news. It may have been just an ordinary night for him, but that night changed his whole life. She felt a new life being born inside her, a little baby that was a part of her. Despite all the difficulties that fate had in store for them, she decided to desperately do everything possible to make him the happiest man in the world, and she the most wonderful mother. Some amazing events had happened earlier, which Rosina had not even suspected, because she had left the hut very quickly, on the threshold of which Yaron appeared. When she had already left the place, he entered the hut and discovered that the girl with whom he had spent an unforgettable night was no longer there. Entering the hut, he timidly asked if she had gone off somewhere, holding a beautiful bouquet of meadow flowers behind her back. But as soon as he left, he felt an indescribable emptiness and realized that Leiden was no longer here. The flowers fell from his hands, and he frantically began to look around, hoping to find at least some kind of note. She disappeared without a trace. He ran into the forest and was sure that maybe he would still be able to find her. He couldn't even imagine that when he returned and decided to give the most beautiful bouquet, misfortune would await him. Yaron was only 14 years old when his beloved mother died unexpectedly. It was a terrible tragedy in the teenager's life, leaving a huge bleeding wound on his soul. His mother was one of the emperor's concubines, and it was no surprise that her fate turned out to be terrible. It was impossible to come to terms with the painful loss, but in the end, she left him something. She gave him the very same tablet with the coat of arms of the kings that his father had left to Yaron, and promised that he would not tell anyone that he was a prince, otherwise the empress would want to kill him. The young gentleman, standing in front of his mother's grave, promised to remember her words forever and fulfill her will. Due to the power of the royal family, he was never able to live in peace because the king sent ferocious monsters to hunt him. He had to protect the local people, and one day one of the old women was attacked by a bloodthirsty, ferocious boar. Yaron rushed to protect her, drawing his sharp sword right next to the mouth of the monster with incredibly huge, sharp fangs. After his mother's death, the young man's heart seemed to freeze, and he realized that he no longer had anything to fear. With all his fury and courage, he rushed at the huge monster and was completely confident of his victory. He was not afraid of either pity or sympathy when it came to saving innocent people. He rushed to his grandmother, asking if she was hurt, while her trembling voice prevented her from even saying anything. She couldn't believe her eyes, because the young master had just killed a huge monster. None of the locals could believe it, insisting that the boy possessed the power of the gods, since only royalty had such power. The light color of his hair revealed his royal blood, and people realized that he was definitely from a royal family. A young fair-haired boy who possessed the power of the gods, and this rumor reached the ears of the great empress, and exactly what his mother had feared happened. A hunt for Yaron began, and the empress sent experienced warlike guards to capture him immediately. The young man understood that he had only one option left: to run as far as possible, without looking back, to save his life. The empress ordered mercenaries to kill him so that no one else would know that he was a man with special powers. He had no protection, No support. All responsibility lay on his shoulders, and he was left alone against the killers. But there was an incredible raging force in him, his faithful support, and waving his sword in the face of danger, the young man shouted that if they wanted to live, they had better get away. The power of the gods in the royal blood was on the one hand a blessing and the most terrible curse. The ability to defeat monsters allowed the young man to save his life, because it was unlikely that anyone could resist him. At the same time, the sight and smell of blood caused him to experience a fit of uncontrollable aggression when he turned into the most ferocious wild beast. When Yaren's bestial rage was released, he could hardly come to terms with the horrors and bloody massacres he had committed, and this time the corpses of the murderers lay before them, cruelly mutilated, but only in this way was he able to survive. When Yaren saw this chaos happening around him, one terrible thought appeared in his head. Did he really do all this with his own hands? His body was shaking from the brutal battle, his hands were shaking, and his legs were trembling violently. The sun had already risen while he was fighting, and the young man realized that it seemed that the fits of rage were getting worse. His days were terrible and monotonous, the inevitable flight into complete solitude that became his life. Someone was constantly hunting him, and Yaren had to fight his pursuers every moment to save his life. He couldn't control his fits of aggression at the sight of blood, and in a second he would turn into the most terrible, bloodthirsty monster. After the young man came to his senses, he continued to run so as not to feel this hellish torment any longer. Yaren crossed the eternally snow-covered Halar Ridge and soon reached the green southern lands, but he did not even know where he was now. Every day of the hero was monotonous. Soon he felt his strength leaving him, and he stopped under that same huge, spreading oak tree. His eyes were closing from helplessness, and the wound was making itself felt, and every cell of his body was in hellish pain. But the young man was incredibly afraid to fall asleep, because at any moment he could be found and killed. Yaren was afraid of losing his mind, his human sanity, forever, and one day, without even noticing it, turning into a bloodthirsty beast, so he mentally asked for someone to come to his aid. At the most terrible moment of his life, when his strength was almost exhausted, he saw a savior in front of him who asked what had happened, and that was when she appeared. It was she who became his hope for a bright future, and the man's mind seemed to return again, and feelings surged with renewed vigor. This unknown girl instantly cured him of the attacks that had tormented him his whole life, and after the night he spent there, he could not stop admiring her face. He didn't know who she really was, but he felt that this was the person who should be next to him. Gently touching her face, Yaren realized for the first time in his life that he was ready to protect someone more than himself. He immediately realized that in front of him was not a young man at all, but a beautiful girl who had been pretending to be a guy all this time. She was fast asleep in his arms. He gently touched her with his lips, and he was almost sure that his life was over, and soon he would turn into the most terrible monster, but she seemed to have destroyed all his spell. She suddenly appeared in his life. Even he didn't fully understand what was happening between them, but he knew that as long as they were together, everything would be fine. It's a good thing it rained that night, washing away all the bloody traces of the terrible massacre. He washed the blood from the ground, but its smell remained on his body. It was necessary to hide the bodies, so that the Empress's assassins would not bother him for at least some time. He got up early in the morning on purpose to cover up the murder, and noticed flowers that could help get rid of the smell of blood. Having picked a beautiful bouquet, he headed to the hut to wish the girl good morning. The bouquet lay on the floor until the young man saw that the girl had disappeared without a trace. She disappeared without a trace, like the worst nightmare, and he couldn't understand why she left without saying a word, perhaps afraid that he was being pursued by killers. Maybe she didn't like that they got close on the very first night, or maybe she was afraid of him, like a bloodthirsty monster. Yaren searched for her until sunset, until the very last rays, and only then realized that he had lost her forever. As always, he was again unable to do anything, and in the semi-darkness of that other silence, he again sobbed from incredible grief. He had neither the wealth nor the power to find her, and as soon as he thought about it, an interesting idea came to his mind. He couldn't just let this girl go, and he realized that he simply needed strong, significant power. Yaren went to the emperor and decided to tell him the truth in order to finally get what was rightfully his. The man burst out laughing. This young gentleman claimed to be his blood son. The unwavering young Yaren looked the emperor straight in the eyes and was ready to achieve his goal at any cost. A long time had passed since this happened, and Rosina stood at the window, adjusting her long hair. A gentle child's voice called her mom in the room, and a fair-haired little boy stood in front of her. He had just woken up and, rubbing his tiny eyes, asked why his mother was leaving so early. She called the boy Ilian and asked why he got up so early today. It has been 7 years since she gave birth to a magnificent baby boy who brought joy to her life every day. He tugged at the hem of her dress, asking his mother not to leave and to stay with him a little longer, putting her own affairs aside. Her charming boy, he was 6 years old, but unfortunately he was too sick, and today she couldn't be late. Rosina worked hard to ensure that he could eat well. He was born prematurely and therefore was in incredibly poor health. He started talking after the others and was falling far behind in his studies, and because Rosanna couldn't pay enough attention to him because of work, she regretted it every day. She asked her son to be patient for a little while and promised to return from work and then go on a picnic together. The boy kissed her with great childish love, and every moment was wonderful with him. They lived in the kingdom of Astana. The heroine worked in the estate of the famous rich Marquis of Hellas. She managed to get a job as a governess for an Astana viscount, and the lady was accepted thanks to the fact that she knew several languages at once. This attitude towards foreigners was a great rarity among the nobility. The Marquis and his wife were very interested in the culture and language of their country. Every day, Kayla greeted her teacher with joy and treated her with great respect. Kayla Hellas, the youngest daughter of Marquis Hellas, was almost going crazy with anticipation today because the teacher was supposed to bring her something. The heroine managed to get hold of a newspaper from the Herbert Empire, and finally she begged it from one of the merchants. The girl was very curious to know what was going on there, and thanks to her parents' influence, she was very interested in the empire, but for Rosina, it was a country to which she did not want to return. She warned that the newspaper might contain a lot of compound words, and for the girl, the empire was something like an exotic and fairy tale land. She began to enthusiastically read the news about how a large monster appeared in the kingdom of Hylar and ate many people alive. Hearing the name Hylar, Rozanov remembered that the man was from Hylar, but fortunately the crown prince of the kingdom organized a hunt and defeated all the monsters. The little girl's eyes begged for approval, and instead of reminiscing, Rosina decided to focus on the lesson, assessing her students' pronunciation. Kayla was interested in new words. She came across the word conquer, and the teacher explained that it means to deprive of the will to resist or to subdue. The little girl was incredibly surprised because this meant that the crown prince of the empire was a very powerful man. The royal dynasty of Herbert possessed the power of the gods, and Rosina said that demons could not be defeated except with such power. His Highness the Crown Prince was born with great talent as a warrior, and his strength was already known in other empires. Rosina suggested that the girl read the following title to understand other difficult words and learn their meaning. The girl began to read about the emperor's illegitimate son, Shim, who still suffers from mental illness. She didn't know what the first word meant, let alone the others, and the teacher had to explain it to her. An illegitimate child is a child not from a legal husband or wife, but from someone else. The girl guessed that this meant that the third prince was not born from the empress, but that his mother had different roots. The emperor's illegitimate son returned to the palace several years ago, and it was even written about in the newspaper. The little girl was surprised that nothing had been known about him all this time, and this story was like a fairy tale plot from a novel. She was so fascinated by the new information that she asked the teacher to tell her something else about the third prince. The teacher admitted that, moreover, this man had never appeared in public, so only rumors were known about him. These rumors were the most interesting for the little girl, and the teacher suggested talking about them in detail and at the same time repeating the words she had learned. The story of the third prince agreed. His mental illness is so severe that he cannot communicate with people. He has attacks and people are afraid of him. While Rosina was busy teaching little Kayla, her son spent time alone reading a book. Today, for some reason, Mom was late, and the boy was starting to worry a little about it. He had already managed to almost read an entire large book in the courtyard of the house. He had already read all the other books, there was only one left, and Ilian had no idea what he would read when it was finished. He had a rather difficult relationship with the kids in the neighborhood, and they constantly pointed fingers at him and called him a stutterer. Ilian hid behind a book every time and didn't want to mess with these stupid, spoiled brats. He quietly called them names, and the guys heard rude words directed at them and said that he probably didn't understand their language. Ilian was surprisingly acting more mature than kids his age and decided to go home rather than get involved with the stupid kids. Suddenly, one of them said unpleasant words about his mother, or rather called her face very beautiful. The kid wasn't ready to tolerate this, and with all his strength he threw the heavy book right into the impudent boy's face. Blood gushed from his nose, and his friends harbored a grudge against the little offender. The kid understood that he couldn't allow some guys to talk about his mother like that, and he stood menacingly in front of the crowd of boys and declared that none of them should ever dare to speak about his mother in such a tone again. The most impudent of the boys was surprised that Ilian was not a stutterer at all, and that he spoke in connected sentences. In fact, the kid just didn't want to talk to fools who hated foreigners, and that's why he didn't talk to them at all. The angry boys shouted, "Will he really get away with all this?" and they decided to take revenge on him. The most brazen of them declared that he would definitely tell his father everything, and the boy and his mother would be kicked out of the country. Finally, he heard the gentle voice of his mother, who came home and called his name. Rosina stood behind him and asked excitedly what had happened here because she heard loud screams. Ilian started crying and said he just wanted to sleep on the veranda, but these boys took his pillow from him and weren't going to give it back. Of course, he didn't tell the whole truth and made up this nonsense, and Mother understood that he was probably very scared because she was late. Rosina shouted that if the neighbor boys continued to bully her, she would definitely tell the Marquis everything. Ilian acted like a true noble gentleman, defending the honor of his mother, and he was proud of himself. Mom was always very busy. She had to be both dad and mom in their family, and the baby understood this from an early age and just wanted her to be with him more often. Rosina told her son that they were not foreigners, there was nothing bad here, and no one had the right to kick them out of here. Perhaps the baby understood this perfectly well, but was still afraid because they were not on their native land. Rosina was worried about this, but she saw how her boy was growing up to be very understanding. Probably because he cares, he pretends to understand everything and not worry about it, and this is what speaks of his responsibility. She would have understood if he had been a little more moody, but when they were holding hands, there were no problems around. Rosina slowly took off her shoe and asked in a playful voice if her son would be able to overtake her this time. She suggested running to the lake to somehow drive away sad and unpleasant thoughts from her son. Holding a basket of groceries in her hands like a little child with childish carelessness, the lady started to run. The baby always supported her cheerful games and was very happy when they played together. Of course, she always gave in to him. There was a special charm in family games they enjoyed each other together. She noted that Ilian was becoming more and more agile every day, and his mother could barely keep up with him. The boy was happy that he reached the lake first, and for a child the most important thing is playing. She tenderly hugged her beloved son, rejoiced at his endurance, and they laughed loudly throughout the forest. Her boy was the biggest winner, and Rosina took him by the arms and began to spin him in the air, simulating a weightless flight. Every moment with him was priceless for Rosina. She watched him grow, learn new things, explore the world with genuine curiosity. In these moments, she was simply a mother, loving and caring, ready to give everything for the happiness of her child. The days flew by unnoticed, filled with games, fairy tales, and walks through the surrounding forests, and with each passing year, the baby reminded her more and more of Yaron. Ilian exclaimed in surprise. His mother had completely forgotten about her shoes and decided to bring them. He jumped up joyfully and ran after her shoes, and his ringing laughter filled his mother's heart with incredible warmth. She looked at her only child with loving eyes and wondered who he was growing up to be so kind. Today was an incredibly beautiful day, but Rosina had no idea what would happen the next second. Literally in an instant, her heart seemed to stop when she saw her beloved baby lying on the grass. He just went to pick up her shoes but suddenly fainted and seemed to show no signs of life. Rosina immediately went to the local doctor, who declared that the boy was completely healthy. She couldn't believe it. It couldn't be, because the boy had been unconscious for 10 whole minutes. He turned to stone, turned pale, and his mother was afraid that he was right now on the threshold of death. The doctor assured him that the temperature, pulse, and blood pressure were normal. The boy was already conscious, and it was quite possible that it was simply sunstroke. The doctor suggested that the lady take care of her cut legs, because while she was carrying the boy, she completely forgot about her shoes. It didn't hurt. She didn't feel how her legs were covered with huge abrasions and bruises. In the evening, she sat next to the baby and asked that if he felt even a little bit unwell, he should tell her about it right away. The baby assured me that he really wasn't in any pain at all, and that he was feeling just fine right now. Ilian looked surprisingly completely healthy, as if this fainting had been feigned. She wanted him to be okay, but they say childhood doesn't go by without illnesses, and she probably just needs to stop crying and worrying. The mother offered to pour her son some more milk, which was good for his health. The kid happily agreed, but again, not a second had passed before his gaze became empty and dull. The little body began to weaken, the baby could no longer sit on the chair, and Rosina held him by the shoulders. The sound of the breaking decanter echoed throughout the house. She dropped it from her hands, and it happened again. The baby had passed out again, her little boy, her Ilian, and was their family doomed forever. None of the doctors could answer what had happened to him, no one could determine the cause of the symptoms, and no one could help her. At first, the fainting spell lasted 10 minutes, then a whole hour, and then the boy was unconscious for a whole day. Ilian spent more and more time unconscious, and his mother desperately turned to almost every doctor in Astana. He was getting worse and worse. No one could help. The doctors were throwing up their hands, and now she was sitting in the dark of night in front of the crib of her baby, who had not regained consciousness for 10 days already. The baby had lost a lot of weight, his cheeks had become pale, and Rosina couldn't understand how much thinner this little body could become. Every day she cried bitterly, feeling guilty for giving birth to him so weak, but she could do nothing about it. Praying near his bed, the heroine asked the Almighty to take her life and preserve the boy's health. Suddenly there was a knock at the door. It was little Kayla, who brought the teacher a good doctor. Exhausted from helplessness, Rosina turned around and did not even expect that the Marquise's family would help her. Lady Eliza Hellas, Marchioness, brought a gentleman, the emeritus physician to His Majesty, who had long experience in healing. She tried to calm the teacher, who couldn't stop crying until the doctor decided to examine the boy. The baby lay there completely pale, and the doctor carefully removed the blanket from him to examine his condition. Rosina cried and begged the doctor to help them because there was no hope for anyone else. The doctor examined the child for a long time, while the mother stood with bated breath and waited for his words. But the verdict was disappointing. The gentleman apologized and admitted that there were no doctors here who could help her child. These words sounded in the silence of the room like a death sentence. Rosina opened her eyes wide, trying to calm the wave of despair that swept over her. The doctor said that he had heard that there were cases with similar symptoms in the Herbertian Empire, and it is quite possible that the mother should look for a doctor there, and she was ready to seek help anywhere if there was no salvation in the empire. This meant that she would have to return back to her native empire, to the place from which she had fled for many years. Together with her little son, after some hesitation, she decided to return, and was ready to descend to the very bottom of hell, let alone return to the empire. The Marquise and her daughter accompanied the teacher and asked her to be strong, assuring her that medicine was, after all, more developed in the empire than here. She was incredibly grateful to the lady and could not even express in words how happy she was. Little Kayla rushed to hug the teacher and really wanted her to come back to them so they could continue their studies. Rosina looked at her beloved pupil and admitted that she would definitely return, because this was her home. Eliza and Kayla saw off the departing ship and were very hopeful that Rosanna would find help in another empire. On board the huge ship, the heroine looked at her home and wondered if she would ever be able to return there again. The Empire of Astana became a fairy tale land for her, the place where she gave birth to a child, but still they were strangers here. All these years she was incredibly happy with her son in a foreign country where she was truly free. But Rosina understood that without her boy, without his health, there would be no happiness for her anywhere. She held the baby tightly in her arms and promised that she would definitely find salvation and cure him. The heroine would have been glad not to set foot in the Empire until the very end of her life, but fate turned out that way, and she would have to return to where he is. Her homeland, to which she returned after 7 years, was the Herbert Empire, and the lady did not even have time for nostalgia. The journey took a month of sailing, a week of crew, but during all this time her son never woke up. Once at the port, she immediately began going to doctors, but they all gave the same answer. Many were not qualified to diagnose such a strange disease and suggested turning to noble doctors. They were already heading to the capital, and Rosina really wanted there to be some doctors there who could finally make a diagnosis. Every day it became more and more difficult for her to look at the boy, who was unconscious and showed no signs of illness. Before entering the capital, guards often inspected the carriages, and finally the heroine and her son arrived in the Empire. The guard loudly asked all the passengers to go outside, but Rosina was surprised why they were suddenly searching them. She was in such a hurry that she did not have time to make fake documents, and she also could not show the certificate from the count. Of course, there was another option, but at that time it was unclear how she would be able to travel with her son. It seems they've introduced new rules here, increased security. They say it's because of the monsters, and sometimes the monsters have managed to break through to the city center, so they've posted more guards. It was quite a serious problem, but it was surprising that the Crown Prince alone could deal with so many monsters. Rosina overheard the conversation, and the men discussed whether the monsters might retreat by the time he returned. They whispered among themselves, afraid that the guards might hear, because the people were slowly losing trust in the Crown Prince. The number of guards increased, there were disturbing rumors, and the lady already felt how dangerous it had become to live in the Empire. Sometimes she had doubts about who this third prince was, and perhaps it was Yaren, since the third prince was found around the time she left him. But she still couldn't believe that the father of her child was the very same illegitimate child of the royal family. The guards checked her carriage and asked the lady to get out and present all the necessary documents. The heroine admitted in a serious voice that she had come here with her son, and that there was no one else in the carriage. Since she had no documents, she took out a small brown bag and showed it to the guards. In the bag lay a small gold bar, which was the heroine's only hope. This could be called a kind of bribery of the guards, but it is unlikely that any of them would refuse such wealth. After exchanging glances, the guards stopped asking for documents and let the Empire into the carriage. It's a good thing that while still in Astana, Rosina had the idea to exchange all her money for gold because it was worth much less there. The carriage slowly drove through the streets of the Empire's capital, and finally the heroine and her son stood in front of the capital's best clinic. She was sure that this was where she would get answers, because this was the last place she could turn. Indeed, for her, this was her last hope, and standing near the door of the doctor's office, she was very worried. The doctor immediately agreed to see them because he had some free time and asked them to come in. The respectable gentleman in glasses asked the lady what she was complaining about, but before he could ask the question, he suddenly stood up from his chair and angrily asked who had let her in here and where her child got such strength. The lady was taken aback, not expecting to hear such a question while the doctor was trying to find out who his father was. In a frightened voice, she asked why the doctor was asking such strange questions, but all she heard was anger. Rosina wanted to know what this had to do with the child's illness, since she had just come for an appointment. It happened literally in a minute. The doctor ordered the guards to immediately throw the woman out through the back door and give the servants a stern warning. It turned out that if they gossiped about him accepting this patient, he might get into problems that he didn't need at all. Rosina pleaded. She saw perfectly well that the doctor knew something and begged him to tell her what her son was sick with. The guards were already holding her by the shoulders. She fell on her knees before the doctor, who honestly admitted that death for this child would be better than his current state. She couldn't believe it. It was real, and the terrible words the doctor had just said were true. Together with her son in her arms, the guards threw her out of the clinic and ordered her never to show her face on the doorstep again. The world seemed to have turned upside down. Helplessness, anger, despair, everything mixed into one burning lump, tearing the soul into pieces. She tried to understand his words, and the doctor shouted loudly that her son's death was better than his current state. Life was still seething inside Ilian. His case was warm. He had arrived without difficulty, and Rosina decided to go to another doctor. The clinic turned out to be a terrible place for her, and it is quite possible that this doctor is just a bad person. She wiped away her tears and, gathering her last strength, rose to her feet. Behind Rosina appeared the figure of a man who exuded danger. Rosina instinctively flinched, hugging her son even tighter as the man sarcastically asked why such a beauty dared to push him. The man approached slowly, and each of his steps echoed loudly in the empty alley. The air seemed to become electrified, filled with a sense of impending disaster. Although Rosina did not push him, this was an excuse for the boar to pester her like a hawk snatching its prey. He was angrily indignant. Did she really think that it was possible to hit a person and just apologize verbally? Two more men, who were probably his partners, came up and said in a squeaky voice that it seemed the girl would have to pay for this. His breath, saturated with the smell of cheap booze, burned her face, and his insolent eyes unceremoniously looked her over from head to toe. One of them grabbed the baby and pulled him out of her arms, assuring her that they just wanted to have a good time with her. Throwing the baby aside, the men continued to laugh loudly at their terrible actions and the defenseless girl. Her protests and pleas were drowned out in the alley, and no one rushed to help the poor lady with a sick child in her arms. They grabbed her by the hair and said harsh words. Rosina closed her eyes, trying not to see the vile faces distorted with hatred. She mentally repeated the prayer, the only thing she had left in this hell, but the prayers did not help. The hands became rougher, the words dirtier. They pulled her hair, forcing her to throw her head back, exposing her neck. Rosina screamed loudly, but people passing by pretended not to hear anything and did not pay attention. Every push sent pain through my temples, every curse burned like a brand. The fragile lady would not have the strength to resist 3 grown men, so she continued to scream frantically, begging for help. She looked at her son, who was lying on the road, and almost no longer believed in her salvation, but suddenly there was a loud roar of hooves. The evil grins on the faces of Rosina's tormentors were replaced by grimaces of horror. Retribution had come. The men began to deny it, as if they had been misunderstood and had done absolutely nothing to this girl. As soon as they finally let her go, she rushed to her baby, who had been lying next to her the whole time. She laid his head on her lap and began to calm him down, because she knew he felt everything. Rosina hugged him tightly and cried so loudly, and her body was pierced by hellish, excruciating pain. With eyes full of tears, she looked at her savior in the flickering light. His face seemed carved from stone, stern and unwavering. Despite all the raging rage, she saw a glimmer of compassion, that very humanity that was so lacking in this damned place. It was him, Yaran, the baby's father. She saw his deep blue, bottomless eyes again. Gratitude, fear, relief, all mixed into one indistinct lump. The lady held her breath and could not believe that after many years she saw him again. Yaran leaned towards Rosina, and she watched as his expression changed from stern determination to tender concern. He was no longer the carefree young man she remembered, and he quietly admitted that he had been looking for her for a very long time. These words pierced the heart, as if they had parted literally yesterday, as if all these long years had not happened. Holding her son tightly in her arms, Rosanna asked him for help, confessing that her boy was very ill. Seeing his exact copy with blonde hair in her arms, the young man asked if this was really his son. She slowly raised her head, looking into Yaren's eyes, which showed mistrust, surprise, but above all, burning pain. She hoped that she would be able to hide the truth, to keep secret the most precious thing she had left, but fate seemed to have decided to play a cruel joke on her. Yaren replied that if the boys were not helped soon, he might never come to his senses. He knew perfectly well how to treat this illness, because his blood flowed through the boy's veins. Now it didn't matter at all how, most importantly, to save her baby's life, and with tears in her eyes, she asked him to help. The coachman rushed the horses at great speed towards the royal palace, following the orders of his master. Many years after their one night together, Yaran and Rosina sat in the same carriage, silent, the silence broken by the sound of wheels on the uneven road and the even breathing of their son. She still didn't understand what had happened between him that night, but the weight of the past, like an invisible chain, was pulling them both back. He became wiser, stronger, but deep down he remained the same Yaran she fell in love with many years ago. That night they simply fell madly in love with each other. They were consumed by an all-encompassing passion. In her right mind she would have acted differently, but now the father of her child, the first and last man in her life, sat in front of her. And after that night with him, the heroine still sometimes dreamed of him for many years. In these dreams, she wanted to be with him for the rest of her life, and was ready to cry with joy that she had finally found him. She sighed awkwardly and wanted to tell him something, but her lips were trembling, and bruises from the blows of those rude men were visible at the corners. He slowly rose and leaned closer to her, and his silence was more eloquent than any words. Yaren carefully wrapped Rosina in his clothes, the subtle scent of sun-warmed fabric mingling with her own slightly tart scent of herbs and honey. He touched her hair, and she was tormented by the question of how he had lived all this time, and maybe he had completely forgotten about her, because after all, it was only one night. Perhaps he doesn't want to remember the madness they both experienced, or perhaps she offended him with something she threw away. Rosina felt her pulse quicken as she looked at his face. She knew that this moment, this closeness, was more than just friendly support. She couldn't help but ask why he continued to remain silent, since they probably had something to talk about. Yaren answered with an uncertain voice. Did she really not want to see him all this time? Rosina looked away and admitted that she had wanted to see him all these years, the words escaping her lips like a bird released from a cage, timid and uncertain. Yaren didn't answer, but only stared intently, apparently trying to decipher the meaning hidden behind her confession. In his eyes, she saw a reflection of her own experiences, but at the same time, an unshakable strength that always attracted her. They had only a short distance to go, and soon they would arrive at a new place. Looking out the window, Rosina saw that they were approaching the most luxurious palace imaginable. The carriage entered the gates of the majestic imperial palace, so luxurious that it was impossible to even believe it. This morning, the Empress was drinking fragrant hot tea when a servant abruptly declared that trouble had happened. He announced the arrival of the third prince. With him was a young woman and a child who suspiciously resembled His Highness. The Empress's name was Tertia Eloy Herbert, and when she turned around, she couldn't believe her ears. Tertia Eloy Herbert was born perfect, with snow-white skin and black hair, and was the only daughter of Duke Eloy. Of course, she was destined to become a great empress, and she was prepared for the ascension to the throne from early childhood. She prayed to the gods for a son for many years, and gave birth to the emperor's crown prince, who was also destined to take the throne. The lady was married to the most noble man in the empire, and Tertia's impeccable life would have been the envy of many. Of course, despite all this, no life can be perfect, and even small spots will still be present in it. When she gave birth to his son, she learned that there was a girl who also had a child from the emperor, and she ordered her execution, deciding to erase this stain. In the dark of night, they found the lady with the child in her arms, while she was screaming loudly for the villains not to touch her son. The Empress was sure that she had given birth to the Emperor's child, and there should be no other heirs, and decided to kill all the bastards, every single one. The unexpected happened. The bastard they had failed to eliminate was already in the palace, and was allowed to have an audience with the Emperor. The Empress was angry that this could happen, but His Majesty ordered that no one be allowed in, not even his wife. They blocked her way. The lady said indignantly that if they wanted to keep their heads on their shoulders, they had better get out of her way. When she entered the luxurious guest hall, she saw a fair-haired young man, an exact copy of him, standing opposite the Emperor. For her, he was the only shameful stain that she could never wash away from her life, and now he appeared here. The Empress hoped this would never happen, and the boy had already disappeared somewhere in the cold forests of the north. She asked where this impostor had fallen from, while the Emperor asked his wife to refrain from commenting, since it was their son and a member of the royal family who stood before them. A cold shudder ran through her body, and Tertia asked her husband if he was completely out of his mind when he decided to announce this to everyone tomorrow. His Majesty has just announced that he has made a deal with this man, who is his real son. But the Empress did not at all want him to make any deals with the lousy bastard. Yaren understood perfectly well that not everyone here would be happy to see him, but now he was following only his goal. He promised His Majesty to exterminate the monsters from the Empire on behalf of the Crown Prince, and thus achieve what he wanted. The monsters had recently multiplied, people were frightened, and none of the nobility even thought of volunteering. So the Crown Prince would soon be heading out to fight the monsters again, but he had already returned wounded from his last attempt to exterminate the monsters, and the Empress did not want him to send him out there again. The Emperor asked his wife to put her in her place to understand why he decided to make this deal. He confessed to Yaren that it was worth watching, and that there was definitely no need to let go of such an opportunity, such a majestic power. The young man was ready to fight on behalf of the Crown Prince and risk his life for this deal. The Crown Prince will remain safe at home, and this act will bring him glory and the love of the people, and the Empress must certainly agree with this. She had no desire to tolerate this man in her castle, or else she would have to put her beloved son in danger again. Now she was faced with a choice, but she welcomed the young man into the imperial family, actually wishing for the monsters to tear him to shreds. However, just as the shopping center failed to kill him over the years, the monsters also failed to tear him to shreds. For 7 years they slandered him, saying that he was mentally ill and killed servants, that his face was disfigured as if from burns, the illegitimate son of an insignificant plebeian. Yaren did not try to refute all these dirty rumors spread by the Empress, but continued to responsibly fulfill his duty to exterminate monsters. He lived the life of a puppet for many years, and now he suddenly appeared in the imperial palace. All this time the Empress was sure that he did not dare to set foot here, but now he appeared here with a girl and a child. The last thing Rosanna wanted was to end up in the imperial palace, but that's how it happened. Fate brought her here again. She held her baby tightly in her arms. The young man opened the carriage door and made sure that nothing happened to them. He even offered to carry the child, understanding how many difficulties the girl had experienced during this time. He saw that she was exhausted and was afraid that Rosina could fall at any moment, and then they would both feel bad. The mother protected her child and held him close to her heart, and said that she would be able to carry him herself. As soon as she got out of the carriage, she realized that her legs were giving way, and indeed, it would be better to give the baby to him. They walked along an abandoned garden. There was not a single gardener here who would take care of the plants. The emperor ordered them to be settled in the estate of the third prince, and the lady, looking at the broken windows, asked what kind of place this was. A small, unkempt estate on the grounds of the royal palace, and she wondered who this young man really was. Entering one of the rooms, Rosina looked around. Yes, this place was luxurious, but clearly no one had lived here for a long time. She asked if he really wanted to meet his superiors here, while Yaren silently walked over to the bedside table. This was his bedroom, and the young man admitted that there was no need to meet anyone at all. He took out from the nightstand a blue glass bottle with a gold lid, which contained an unknown liquid. Sitting down on the bed, he gave the medicine to the baby, who was still unconscious. Just one drop of the life-giving medicine helped the baby come to his senses a little, and he finally took his first breath. Ilian smiled, and a blush finally appeared on his pale face. Rosina couldn't believe it. She had been wandering around doctors for a long time, and just one drop of this elixir brought the boys back to their senses. Yaren asked. The lady must have been very scared when she first saw him faint, and now the baby needs to be well fed, and he will wake up in a couple of hours. Tears of happiness rolled down her cheeks. She was incredibly grateful to Yaren for his help, and asked what kind of medicine he gave him. The young man fell silent awkwardly, and it was unlikely that he would have been able to answer her question about what kind of remedy it was. His recipe was only for the imperial dynasty, so he had no idea what it consisted of. He said the baby is not sick. It is a rare condition caused by a conflict between the human body and divine power. It is not always so severe, but it shows that his power is very great. And the fact that he was born with such power means that he is a member of the imperial family, and royal blood flows through him. The baby was born with the same divine power of a beast as Yaren himself, and it was simply impossible to believe. Now Yaren asked if she would really continue to deny that this was his son too. The mother spent the whole night with her son, and finally this morning was joyful and calm for her. As soon as she opened her eyes, she looked at her beloved baby and breathed a sigh of relief. His breathing and heartbeat became much clearer, which meant he was slowly coming to his senses. The baby was lying in a warm, cozy bed. His mother decided to let him rest a little after everything he had been through. Now he needed to be given water or something to eat, and the heroine, looking at the door, wondered if she could go outside. Yesterday, Yaren confirmed that this little boy was his son. He quietly left and did not return all night. And perhaps now he will demand rights to his offspring, and the lady could not even imagine what to do with all this. Outside the door, she heard quiet, timid steps approaching the room, and then a familiar, velvety voice. It was him, Yaren, holding a tray of fragrant hot food in his hands. The young man admitted that he wasn't a very good cook, but he hoped she would like it. Unfortunately, he was not provided with servants, and early in the morning he got up and prepared everything himself. The lady was surprised that the royal family could live without a single servant, and now she was even more confused about the true identity of this man. She knew absolutely nothing about him, and the young man timidly asked if it was possible to check the child's condition. He gave him some more medicine so that the baby would come to consciousness faster and feel good. His complexion has improved significantly, and fortunately he will be able to open his eyes tomorrow. The lady thanked him tirelessly for saving the boy, but Yaren insisted that it was his son too. Rosina couldn't look him in the eyes and looked away in every possible way, but she understood that she had to tell him the truth. The lady admitted that thanks to him the boy's life was saved, but she was ashamed to say such impudent words. She plucked up her courage and said that when the baby finally wakes up, they will return to where they used to live, and this is her final decision. Yaran, with a tremor in his chest, could not believe it again. Was she really going to tell him right now that she was going to leave him forever again? Rosina admitted that she had raised her child well for the last 7 years without him, and that she had her own life and work to which she wanted to return. And now she asked his permission to let her go, to give her freedom and her former life, in which she was happy. The young man sighed heavily and answered sincerely it was incredibly difficult for him to do this, because all these years he had been thinking about her. Her arrival at the palace yesterday revealed the existence of her and the royal family's child, and that was the main reason why he couldn't let her go anymore. The information coming from his lips sounded frightening, and Yaren had a good reason to warn about it. He admitted that if the lady wanted, she could leave the palace at any time, but a child from the royal family would not be able to do so. He was right. The Empire, which especially protects the royal family with divine power, and once it is known that the baby is a member of the royal family, it will lead to the issuance of an imperial warrant. So if she leaves alone, this child will become his illegitimate son. A child born into a royal family was not a good thing, because Yaren himself was like that. And so, a slowly developing child, without a mother in this dangerous place, and if this happens, the boy's life will undoubtedly be miserable. Yaren asked her frankly if she would have to make a choice whether she was ready to leave this place alone, leaving her child. Or she needs to marry him and stay close to her baby, and unfortunately there were no other options. If she doesn't get married, she'll have to leave the child and leave this place, and the heroine screamed, it doesn't make any sense to her. If she marries this man, her life will change dramatically. She will have to become a noblewoman again, and even meet her family, break her father's will and become part of the royal family, and she will never be able to return home again. Even if that happened, she felt she hardly had any choice, and she could never leave Ilion. Suddenly his quiet, gentle voice was heard. He said the word mom, and this meant that the baby had finally woken up. The lady said menacingly, Yaren leaves her no choice but to say the most cruel things to her. It was the only option to save the boy's life and make his life happy, so she agreed to marry. She had one main condition, which the young man had to follow unquestioningly. Her condition was divorce, and as soon as she said it, the hero did not immediately understand what it all meant. For Rosina, it was literal. She understood that the wedding would take place for the boy's sake, and as soon as the baby safely became an adult and found his place in life, they would divorce. The young man did not understand why he had to resort to such cruel measures, since they had a lot in common, and they could be living on his behalf now. Rosina looked away and admitted that she didn't love Yaran. The words sounded quiet, almost inaudible, like fragile ice breaking under the weight of the truth. Finally, Yaran slowly raised his eyes to her. There was no anger or resentment in them, only sadness, deep and all-consuming. She confessed that this night for her was just a mistake, caused by an incomprehensible, enormous force, like witchcraft. She told the whole truth. All this time she was terrified of how her body, mind, and will were taken away that night. The lady asked if he hadn't experienced the same thing. Yaran remained silent, motionless, like a statue carved from stone. His hands trembling, the young man admitted that he had never experienced anything like it, and sadly agreed to accept her terms. In turn, he decided to put forward his own, and asked the lady to simply try to pretend to be a good couple, in love and harmony. He wanted her, more than anyone else, to pretend to truly love him and be able to pretend to be happy. After all, if the baby sees that everything here is against his will, he will feel it and it will harm him. Yaran said that he wanted to be a good father to him, since he had not had the right to be one until now, and he wanted the baby to grow up in love and care. Her heart was breaking with pain, but Rosina knew there was no other way out. She thought it would be better for both of them. All these years she had carried this lie inside her like a heavy stone, and now, having thrown it off, she felt not relief, but only a dull, aching pain. For the sake of the baby's happiness, she was ready to do anything, and he was ready to believe that she would keep her promise. The Knights of Tiliad are a small group of elite knights created to fight bloodthirsty demons. While she is renowned throughout the Empire for her demon-slaying exploits alongside the Crown Prince, Yaren is actually the true leader. Today, the knights finally managed to rest in the rest area, and each of them felt an incredible sense of relief. A knight named Elvin, lying on the sofa, thanked Lily with red hair for coming, and the commander finally gave them a rest. Knight Isaac still couldn't believe that they had actually found her, and it all seemed so unreal. To be honest, even if they didn't dare tell the commander about it, all this time they thought this girl was dead. 7 years ago, when the master became commander, he gave another personal order in addition to the demons, on these women named Leiden with red hair. One of the knights was even surprised at how the commander was kneeling yesterday, and he had never seen such an obedient person. Yesterday he gave her a leave of absence, and the knights decided to take advantage of this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Krail invited Elvin to go with him so that he could finally get some proper rest. But Elvin was assigned to deal with all these guys who disturbed the young lady yesterday. A second-in-command named Elcid was to go with him to guard the prince. And when the knight's vacation ends, they will need to take turns with the security group to ensure safety, because they had to protect the commander with their lives. Some of the knights went to rest, while others went to serve their commander. There was unrest in the main castle of the Imperial Palace today, and Yaren accidentally overheard something. The maids whispered, "It was incredible, the third prince who never leaves the palace suddenly brought a woman and a child." The guards at the main gate and the palace saw everything for themselves, and all the servants of the imperial estate discussed it tirelessly. No one could help but notice the child's appearance and his transparent golden hair, which spoke of royal blood. Immediately, there was talk of an illegitimate child, and no one could believe that the young man had actually brought them here, and that perhaps they were going to get married. Be that as it may, now there would be no one left in the palace who did not know this information, and Yaren was upset by this. He deliberately drove the carriage through the main gate so that the emperors and empress knew of their presence, and rumors spread throughout the palace. Yaren used all her strength to keep this girl here so as not to repeat the mistake and not let her slip again. For 7 whole years, under the pretext of exterminating demons, he traveled throughout the empire, tirelessly searching for her. But neither her name nor any trace of the red-haired woman could be found, and with each passing year he felt more and more despair. When the attacks began, thoughts about her became more and more persistent, and it was difficult for him to fight it. Even just holding her hand again would be enough for him, and what a feeling it was then, and now even all the memories have rotted away. Sometimes he wondered if he had gone crazy that night, and maybe she had never existed, and it had just been a hallucination. She disappeared without a trace, and all these years he wondered if she really existed in this world. One day, while wandering down the streets of the Empire, he saw her photograph on a notice board, a red-haired lady with brown eyes. During the year, when he was suppressing an uprising in one of the provinces, he found her on an old wall painting. He approached one of the local residents and asked if he knew who the woman in the photograph was. The man immediately realized that the young man was not from around here, and it was strange that he did not know this girl. He said her name was Rosina Starout. She disappeared without a trace several years ago, and that's why her photo hangs here. The daughter of the late Viscount, she looked after the estate and the peasants and was a very good person, but after her disappearance, their life turned into chaos. There was once a reward for finding it, but now it seems everyone has given up, because no one has managed to find it. During his investigation, Yaren discovered that the time they met with Leiden coincided with the period when the heiress of the Starout estate went missing. For the first time he learned the whole truth. The red-haired girl's name was Rosina, and he had hope of finding her. Her real name was different, her past was different, and she was probably running from it as much as he was. Soon the deputy commander of the knights arrived to him, and from his agitated face one could tell that something had happened. They received a message from children at the pier that an unidentified red-haired girl had arrived in the country. A woman with gold at a checkpoint in the capital, and local residents said she was looking for a doctor in many clinics. And with this weak clue, Yaren managed to find her traces when he was already giving up, and hopefully she was almost lost. When he saw her in that alley with a boy in her arms, he realized that it was she and he had finally found her. And now, standing before him, alive and well, she persistently asked him to give her a divorce and never see her again. Yaren could not accept that she would leave him again after he had spent all these years searching for her. But the words that she didn't love him cut into his heart like a sharp knife, tearing it into pieces. No, he didn't want to come to terms with it, not this time, when his happiness was so close. And even if she doesn't love him, he was ready to win her heart and make her the happiest girl on earth. And now he prayed that she would just give him this chance, no matter what, no matter how she felt, even if he had to sell his soul for her to stay with him. Today, the third prince requested an audience with His Majesty the Emperor and was already standing at the door of his office. Emperor Baramun Herbert asked what was the matter, since they had just spoken recently. Yaren came to tell him important news, which first of all needed to be reported to the emperor. He came to announce his plans for a quick wedding and believed that this should be the beginning of a new life. The emperor sighed and realized that the young man's plans were very serious, and he had no right to dissuade him. It was necessary to know from which family the daughter he was going to marry in order to give his permission. Yaren told the lady from the house of Count Starot, although he was sure that the emperors already knew this very well. The emperor had heard of a long-fallen family that had challenged the royal family, without knowing its place, without a name or power, as it should have. He had a negative attitude towards this family, and that is why the count, before his death, asked his daughter never to marry people because of the royal family. The emperor wished, the son is free to do as he wishes, and he does not dare to interfere with his decision. His Majesty had many questions after meeting with the third prince, and he could not find answers to them. Why did he go into this dangerous zone, and is it really all happening because of just one ordinary woman? And if this was really the case, the emperor realized he had a great opportunity, a leash, to control this dangerous guy. Ilian, unconscious, wandered in his dreams across the endless northern lands. Suddenly he heard someone crying, and immediately recognized it as the voice of his beloved mother. He wandered for a long time in the labyrinths of his mind, could not find a way out. He just wanted his mother to finally stop crying. But then a luminous white council appeared before him. The baby extended his hand and cried out loudly. He was going towards her voice. Finally, a miracle happened. The baby opened his eyes and said the word, "Mom," seeing her sweet face. Rosina couldn't hold back her tears. She sat next to him the whole time, hoping and waiting for him to open his eyes. Ilian smiled weakly, looking at his mother's face, so familiar and beloved he was still weak, but his gaze said that he remembered everything that happened. Mother Rosina hugged him close, feeling his small body warm her heart. Now that he was here again, next to her, the world had color again, her little hero, her hope, her everything. She began asking him if he was in pain, if everything was okay with him, and if he was hungry. Ilian asked his mother not to cry, and she admitted that tears of happiness were flowing down her cheeks, and a man's hand appeared on her shoulder. He saw him for the first time. His gaze, as if riveted, could not tear itself away from the tall, broad-shouldered man. Who is this stranger? Why is he looking at his mother with such an intent gaze? These questions swirled in the boy's head, pushing a timid curiosity to the surface. Ilian felt a power emanating from him, vague but tangible, like the heat from a red-hot hearth. He didn't understand what had happened during this time, and who this tall, broad-shouldered man with blonde hair was. The baby was most surprised by why he was hugging his mother by the shoulders, and Yaren politely greeted the baby. The baby, trembling all over, became a little scared and asked his mother who the person standing next to her was. The time had come to find out the truth. His mother admitted that it was his biological father standing in front of him. The baby was noticeably upset, and the heroine was scared at first. He was probably just very surprised. Yaren suggested that she leave them alone, deciding that just he and his son could talk for a while. The lady looked silently at her future husband and did not know what to do. Since this was their first meeting, it was probably best if they spent time together, and she promised to stay outside. The baby had never been separated from his mother, and now he certainly didn't want her to go anywhere. Since his mother said that everything would be fine, he understood that he was in no danger here. His thin voice cut through the silence of the room like the cry of a seagull over a raging sea, and doubt mixed with fear splashed in the child's eyes. He didn't understand who this person was who had invaded their quiet world. Yaren took a step forward, his movements smooth and careful. Yaren smiled and admitted in a calm voice that the boy looked incredibly like him. His gaze met Ilian's, and there was no threat in it, only gentle sympathy. And he said once again that he was his real father, his blood relative and his soulmate. The boy screamed that all these years he had no father, and now he doesn't have one either and never will. Sooner or later, the baby would still have to find out the truth about his father, and Rosina was afraid of this moment, afraid of destroying the fragile connection that they had created together. The young man understood that the boy was simply scared and thanked him for finally finding him, and in any case they would become great friends. He warned the boy that from now on this was his home, and he and his mother were going to get married soon. These words came as a bolt from the blue to the little boy, but something inside him told him that everything was not as simple as it seemed at first glance. The young man began to tell that the mother had gone through a lot to save the baby's life, so there was no need to make her suffer any longer. With tears in his eyes, the child assured that while he and his mother lived alone, she never once wanted to see this man. Yaren understood that the boy was offended, and all his life he had never even imagined that he had a real father. The baby screamed and cried that he would tell his mother that he had tortured him, that his mother loved only him, and that she definitely was not going to marry him. He was capricious, swore, assuring them that the two of them were doing just fine without this man, and he should let them go. Yaren had never hugged a child before in his life, but this was the first time he saw his little one hate him so much. He didn't even know how to approach him, and the only communication skills he knew were giving orders to his subordinates. He admitted that he had no choice but to send his mother away and live together with him alone. The little boy didn't understand what all this meant, and the mere thought that his mother would go away somewhere filled him with unimaginable fear. Yaren approached his son, a boy with royal blood, and told him that this meant that the baby would not be able to leave this castle, and the only solution was to agree to marriage, and only in this way, unfortunately, could they live together. But for the boy, it sounded like an unimaginable lie. The young man admitted that he didn't understand at all why the baby was pretending to be stupid in front of his mother, but it was better to let him continue his game. After all, if someone knows that he is actually so smart, the Empress will try to get rid of him as quickly as possible. Ilian was indeed a very smart boy, and he took his father's words seriously. At that moment, the door of the room swung open. Rosina appeared in it, and she decided to check if everything was okay here. She heard the child's cries, so she began to worry and decided to intervene in their conversation. The baby smiled, just like his father, and she could even see if the two of them had actually managed to get along. Perhaps this was due to strength rather than physical illness, but the baby recovered very quickly and soon came to his senses. Even the doctor confirmed his good condition after examining him, and the very next day his mother went out with him to breathe some fresh air. Ilian smiled and said that everything was perfectly fine with him, but his mother's heart was still trembling and worried. He looked around at the place where they now had to live, and the baby did not understand why they ended up here. For him, everything around was somehow dirty, unkempt, and in fact, no one had looked after this place for a long time. Mother promised that they would definitely find plenty of space to hide and play here. Hide and seek would be great. She still didn't understand how Yaren had lived in such a place for so long, and if their son was going to grow up here, they would have to fix everything together. The real problem was that the wall seemed to have been built only to isolate the palace. The heroine couldn't even recognize this place in the palace, not understanding why the wall was so incredibly high. Together with her son, she decided to see what was outside the door, and most importantly, her baby was finally happy. Rosina didn't want him to feel trapped in this place and wanted the best life for him. They entered an open door, behind which was another part of the imperial palace. Here, everything was different. A gardener was tending the plants, and there were an incredible number of servants and maids around. As soon as she opened the door, she felt the contemptuous glances of everyone present. The maids began to whisper. It was the same woman who came then, and with her a little boy, incredibly similar to the third prince. The lady felt terribly uncomfortable and unpleasant. The servants began to whisper right in front of her, as if she were an empty space. The maids saw the third prince leaving his palace, and only now did the heroine begin to understand something. This meant that Yaren was the third prince that the Empress hated so much, and this explained why he was left without guards and servants in the palace. They started laughing loudly at the maid. It seems the girl is here to raise her low status, and she clearly came to the wrong place. Even the servants laughed at him, and the heroine was in no position to feel sorry for him, but the family completely abandoned her future husband. Ilian felt everything. He noticed his mother's sad eyes, her dejected appearance due to the servants' stupid ridicule. He thought that she would be happy with him, and it was no accident that they ended up in this place, but the boy understood that everything was not as fabulous as he imagined. The kid decided to avoid the stupid ridicule, but the maids continued to stare in their direction and still laughed. He was indignant. Mother was irritated when she heard their words, probably all because of this man, so the baby screamed loudly that his leg hurt. In order not to tolerate these antics any longer, he decided to lie, and Rosina suggested that the little one stop and not go anywhere else. She didn't want her son to worry. He had been lying down for a long time and naturally forgot how to walk, and now he only needed to start walking a little at a time. Taking the boy in her arms, she admitted that he clearly did not understand what was happening, but he felt everything. Mother confessed that in the future, many strange, inexplicable things would happen, and even she would not be able to cope with all of it. But no matter what happened, she promised to always be there for him, her little hero. Ilian was not an ordinary boy. He was destined for an incomprehensible fate that even Rosina did not suspect. When they were already returning back to the palace, Yaron appeared on the threshold, clearly looking for them. He asked if they had a good walk with the child, as it was their first walk around the palace grounds. His face was worried. He offered to hold the baby, and he knew how hard it was to hold a child in your arms all the time when he was still exhausted. Suddenly, Ilian confessed that he no longer felt anything and could walk on his own, as long as his mother did not give him into the hands of this man. She lowered him to the ground. The boy, with an angry look directed at Yaron, hid behind the hem of her skirt, as if he was afraid of something. Rosina asked for forgiveness, and perhaps the boy was simply very ashamed, and while she was not looking, he showed funny faces and tongue to his father. The young man came to announce that the wedding date had been set, and that it was to take place very soon, and that everyone should be ready for the important event. Hearing this, the boy's legs gave way, and he didn't even notice how he fell to the ground, making an incomprehensible sound. The lady was scared, wondering if his legs were really still not okay, but the baby simply couldn't believe it, wondering if his mother was really getting married for real. In Rosina Starout's home county, her mother and her daughter lived a wonderful life, but today she announced that she wants a divorce. Young Countess Rania Starout was outraged. Yesterday was her wedding anniversary, but her husband simply gave her an ordinary bouquet of flowers, and nothing more. Her mother, the former Countess Marcella, assured her that this was quite enough and that she should not demand more, but the lady did not think so, and even ordinary people do not give their wives such trivial gifts. It was because of her that he received the high title of Count, and Rania did not like this attitude because for a long time she asked him for new expensive shoes. Marcella brought the son of the Marquis, who could not receive a title for a long time, and made him the son-in-law of their family, and he probably does not even know how to be grateful to them. The lady admitted that he had long ago paid off all the family debts, and she wanted a luxurious life, not some ordinary flowers for an anniversary. Rania was sure that it was all because she couldn't have children. They had been married for a year. They still didn't have a child, and she simply hated her life. Mother was indignant. Did the Count really tell her this? And it was not her fault that she could not have children right now. It was just her assumption, and Marcella didn't understand whether this young man had made her feel this way, trying to support his beloved daughter. Most of all, she blamed Rosina. If she had not run away, she would be here and would not have to marry such a man, and she considered her just a selfish girl who allows them to live on their own now. The former countess declared that she was definitely not a winner when she left her warm and cozy home, and perhaps she would soon die on the streets from hunger and lack of money. The tears were fake. They wished Rose ill, and they still hated her for choosing to be happy, for choosing her life. The butler reported that new messages had arrived in the county, and the letters were sent by someone very important. The exquisite golden envelope with a ruby seal was from the Baron, and the former countess wondered what it all meant. Marcella held her breath, and she couldn't even imagine what could be written in this letter, and perhaps something had happened. In a trembling voice, she told her daughter that a letter had arrived from the imperial palace, the first since her father's death. The imperial family could not write letters just like that, and the lady asked her mother to open the letter as soon as possible and read what was inside. Marcella began to read slowly. It was an invitation to a wedding, where the groom was the great third prince, Yaron Herbert. The lady clutched the crisp invitation paper with her fingers, and Marcella's face, usually haughty and imperious, was distorted by a grimace of disbelief. An elegant font displayed the names of the bride and groom. The place and time of the ceremony. Rania froze with her mouth half open. Could this really be true? Could Rosina, who had run away from home many years ago, be returning, and as a bride, no less? The invitation stated that Rosina and the third prince were getting married, and rage boiled in her chest, mixed with curiosity and undisguised excitement. After all these years, this girl managed to do something, and her sister laughed. She ran away from home, and now she's marrying an ugly psychopath. Mother admitted that even if he is ugly and crazy, royal blood is royal blood, and that is above all else. And it seems the time has come for their family to be returned to their former glory, wealth, and luxury, which the former countess had dreamed of all these years. Judging by the fact that they sent out wedding invitations, it seems like the two are staying to live in the palace after the wedding. And looking at her daughter, the former countess said with a sly grin that they now had an incredible amount of work to do, and this would be the main event. After a pleasant walk, Rosina very quickly put the baby to bed and quietly left his bedroom so as not to make a sound. All this time, Yaron was waiting for her, just to be alone together and discuss the upcoming important joint event. Little Ilian was already fast asleep in his crib, and they could calmly be alone, but it turned out that something was bothering Rosina. For some reason, her face was not joyful and happy, as if she was burdened by the upcoming wedding with a man with whom she hardly wanted to live. Yaron suggested that she go for a walk. It was a warm summer day outside, and the lady happily agreed to clear her head. He said the wedding was supposed to take place in about 2 weeks, and that was a very short time to prepare. The young man assured them that this did not mean that they would be ready for this solemn ceremony, and he was confident that everything would go smoothly. So the ladies have nothing to worry about. They will be ready for the wedding, it will go just great, and a new life will begin. Her life changed very quickly. Just a few months ago, she was an ordinary girl dreaming of quiet family happiness, and now she was preparing to become the wife of an influential prince whose name thundered throughout the area. Yaron could not help but notice her excitement, because there was no joy at all in the lady's soul, and he asked what he felt. The lady wanted to know who her husband really was before they stood at the altar and exchanged vows. The time had come to confess everything. Yaron called his full name and high title, His Highness the Third Prince. All this time Rosina was sure that he was using a pseudonym, but everything was different, and from the very beginning he spoke only the truth. The young man smiled and asked if she really wouldn't tell him her real name, even though he already knew it very well. The prince wanted to hear it from her lips, her real name, for her to pronounce it before him on this warm night. The prince's gaze lingered on her, and now, standing on the threshold of his estate, she felt the tart taste of guilt on her tongue. She spoke her name, Rosina Starrout. She did not expect reproaches or anger, and she knew he would understand her, even despite the lie. Prince Yaron smiled as if they had just met, and they both felt relieved that after weeks of tense anticipation, convoluted negotiations, and mutual suspicion, the tension had finally eased. The ice of mistrust that had shackled their relationship cracked under the rays of a sincere smile, and most of all she was worried that during this time he had changed a lot. When she first met him, he was like a wild beast, but now he speaks and acts like a noble man of royal blood. Those bestial eyes, at once full of cold and warmth, have not changed at all over these long years. The silence that hung in the air was filled not with words, but with understanding. Suddenly Rosina stumbled, and Yaron carefully embraced her. Strong arms held her securely, not allowing her to fall. For a moment she froze, feeling the warmth of his body and the barely perceptible scent of sandalwood emanating from his clothes. A chance moment changed something in their relationship. The gap that had separated them before seemed to become a little smaller, and it was those eyes that looked at her that day. Rosina felt his gaze stealthily sliding over her, and her cheeks inexorably betrayed her embarrassment. An awkward silence hung in the air, broken only by the rustling of a dress and the soft singing of birds in the garden. Looking into her eyes, the young man confessed that if she married him, a lot would change in her life, and she could be truly happy with him. Yes, she won't be as free as before, and that's what I was most worried about. I didn't want her to feel like she was in a cage. The imperial palace is full of people who are after him, and Rosina and the child will be rejected by the society of the nobility. He promised to do everything to ensure that she and their baby would never be harmed, and that here, next to him, she would be completely safe. After his pleasant words, she admitted that everything was perfectly fine, and he shouldn't feel guilty for what happened. She left her hometown and raised Ilian alone all this time, and she went through too many hardships to be weak. Rosina did not consider herself someone who needed to be protected, and she was confident that she could overcome any obstacles that appeared in her path. It seemed that even the prince himself did not expect to hear such words from the brave lady, and he hardly imagined what she had to endure during all this time. He held her hands as she promised to try her best after they got married to make it a worthy marriage. As a mother, as his wife, as the spouse of the third prince, she was ready to do whatever was necessary for the sake of happiness and love. The warm morning sun illuminated the room. The baby finally woke up and saw his mother standing near the window. Today she had a radiant smile on her face and asked him if he had slept well, suggesting that they play in their garden. Rubbing his eyes with his tiny hand, the boy asked if they would really have to play in such a dirty place, full of cobwebs and overgrown bushes. Rosina was determined. Today a shovel appeared in her hands, and she promised that she would clean everything up herself and make this garden the most beautiful. The little boy didn't understand why his mother was cleaning, because the garden didn't belong to them and someone else could do it. Mother answered confidently, "This is their house now? This is theirs left, and Dad said that she can decorate it however she wants." Ilian wondered if this was really their home now, and if his mother had really decided to live here, but today she was smiling, something he hadn't seen for a long time. She suggested going together so that the baby could get some fresh air, and she would clean up the palace grounds. And only now the baby is gradually beginning to understand that perhaps his mother really does want to live here, and perhaps she really does like this young man who calls himself his father. The little hero gathered his courage and decided that he absolutely had to help his beloved mother sort out all her affairs. The baby was a skilled digger, even though he was doing it with a spoon, and he definitely couldn't leave his mother alone with her dirty work. The animals collected stones, carried away dry branches, and thanks to her son and his little friends, the lady will soon be able to plant all the flowers so that the garden will become a wonderful place for them to live. All was quiet. Rosina was tidying up the garden, trimming the wilted rosebuds and weeding the weeds that were persistently pushing through the cracks between the slabs of the paving path. Suddenly Rosina felt a strange, frightening vibration. Physical rather, something that pierced her through and through like an icy wind. The feeling of anxiety did not leave her, on the contrary, it grew stronger. The sound seemed to come from the castle. The baby pressed himself against his mother so tightly that she felt he was scared. No one could understand what was happening, and suddenly Rosina noticed whether the road had always been so clear. Rosina looked at the palace and was surprised. She remembered clearly the cobwebs clinging to the corners, the crumbling plaster, the ominous cracks spreading across the walls. And now the golden patterns on the gates glittered in the rays of the setting sun, reflecting them in the polished marble slabs. It was sparkling clean, although everything had been different here in the morning, and now the castle looked like new in just half a day. It was impossible to believe, and Rosina could not tear her eyes away from the shining purity. She was even more surprised when she saw two young men with tools in their hands, and the second one was carrying a bucket with a rag. They stopped immediately and probably didn't expect to see her either, and one of them seemed to be completely speechless. Mr. Yaren came out from the other side and saw his future wife looking at everything that was happening with bewilderment and delight. He confessed she returned earlier than expected. The lady asked who all these people were who probably brought order here. The prince had no choice but to lie that they were supposedly workers whom he had hired specifically for the cleaning. He couldn't be told that these were his faithful knights. Yaren understood that the castle seemed to be lacking many things for comfortable living, and from early morning these people were repairing every crack. The prince even thought that perhaps it would be better to simply build a new castle than to clear away all this devastation. But since the castle is old and there are restrictions on repairs, it would be better for them to prepare temporary housing and still build a new one. Looking at his living conditions, it seemed that he received very little support from the imperial family, and the heroine did not understand where he got the money for the repairs. She was ready to help him if he lacked financial resources, because she had some gold that she had put aside. He smiled and replied that there was nothing to worry about, but what was more important was whether she had time to have dinner, and he had just hired a cook so that they could all have dinner together. Little Ilian looked at his father and was indignant he wanted to eat alone with his mother, and was clearly not happy with this turn of events. The prince politely suggested that they all go together to eat like a real friendly family at the same table. All this time the knights stood nearby, and caring Rosina suggested that they also have dinner together because they had been working since early morning. Yaren and Ilian were clearly unhappy, and each of them simply wanted to dine alone with the lady. So the knights saw their displeased looks, because now they would have to dine together. In the huge, luxurious dining room, there was an oak table for receiving guests and carved chairs, and the heroes had already taken their seats. The baby wanted to sit next to his mother, but the prince suggested that he sit at the head of the table, and Rosina felt a little uncomfortable. Unfortunately, the prince had not yet managed to find servants, so he brought out all the dishes himself, and this was commendable. The delicious aromatic food also went to his knights, who were going to help him, but the commander assured that everything was in perfect order. Yaren even offered to specially cut pieces of meat for the lady, thereby showing concern for her. The little one noticed that this guy was constantly trying to win his mother's favor, and she moved her plate toward herself to get ahead of him. The prince saw that the boy was very jealous, and this was not surprising, and for many years they lived together. The knights sat in bewilderment and watched attentively what was happening. One even had water pouring out of his mouth in surprise. The commander looked at the young man and ordered him to control his facial expression so as not to be punished. They immediately turned away so as not to inconvenience the commander, and began to wish for delicious aromatic food. Rosina noticed that the young man must have been very hungry, and the food turned out to be incredibly tasty. She was delighted the dish turned out exquisite, and praised the chef, who certainly knew how to cook. And the knights looked at their commander and were perplexed. Today this man looked like just an ordinary young man. For some reason, the baby sat at the table with a sad face. He almost didn't touch his food, and was very upset. Mother asked him if he was really tired or feeling unwell, and he didn't even try a single piece. Yaren reported that they say that the delicious sweet dessert is already ready, and the boy needs to wait a little longer. The baby sighed and replied that he was very sleepy, and perhaps this was his childish trick to distract his mother's attention. She couldn't ignore the child's request, took him in her arms, and confessed to the prince that they would probably have to leave so that the baby could rest. On the one hand, Yaren was upset, but he understood perfectly well that nothing could be done, and the baby was probably really tired. He wished them a good evening and did not want them to feel uncomfortable or burdened. As soon as she turned her back, the boy made a funny gesture with a sly smile, making it clear that it was just a joke. Yaren wasn't angry at this child. He understood children's feelings because he appeared in their lives suddenly, some unknown uncle who calls himself his father. When Rosina woke up in the morning, she felt in a great mood, had slept well, and was well rested. The weather was warm outside, and it was a shame to stay at home on such a day, so she quickly left the room to check how things were outside. But she didn't even notice that Yaren was standing in front of the door, and she buried her head right into his chest with all her strength. The young man asked for forgiveness. He tried to knock, but he approached right at that second as she managed to open the door. He looked at her with a gentle smile. The lady asked if everything was okay with him and whether he had really gotten up so early. Rosina finally looked happy and rested, and all this was only thanks to the care of the prince, who provided her with excellent living conditions with her son. He awkwardly asked if she wanted to leave the imperial castle with him today, and he understood that she couldn't spend all her time here. The heroine looked at him in surprise and was embarrassed. Was he really suggesting that they go alone? It was a little difficult for her to be around the third prince, and she felt a little embarrassed when they were alone. His kindness and care, for reasons she could neither understand nor repay, were both confusing and burdensome. That was why she had insisted on having companions at dinner last night, and had timidly admitted that she would probably stay at the castle. But Yaren wanted to go out today for a reason. He was going to buy something for his son, and he needed help. He knew absolutely nothing about children, and had no idea what a boy might like or what he needed for some games. So, gently taking the lady's hand, he confessed that his mother knew better than to ask someone else who was not part of their family. Usually, noble people leave the upbringing of children to themselves and never interfere, but he tried to be a good father, caring and noble. And Rosina thought she also needed to try harder. She promised to be a good mother and the most wonderful wife, and happily agreed to go out together. The prince warned that he only needed to prepare a carriage so that they could arrive in comfort. Like a bolt from the blue, the child's voice behind him, saying the word "mommy," was heard. A baby stood at the threshold of the room, rubbing his sleepy eyes, and he did not see his mother next to him on the bed, so he immediately went to look for her. Finally, the baby woke up. Rosina knelt down in front of him and told him the good news: Daddy wants to buy him the most wonderful toy. The baby woke up immediately with joy, and I asked if he could also go to the store to choose something he would like. The prince assumed that there would be a lot of walking to do, and the boy hadn't quite got it all together yet, but in reality he just wanted to go with Rosina so that it would at least somehow resemble a small date. The kid was incredibly smart. He understood what tricks his father was pursuing and did not want to agree with it. He pointed his finger at the tall, strong gentleman and declared that they would succeed if he picked him up and simply carried him the whole way. The kid thought his plan sounded absolutely brilliant, and none of them could disagree with it. In the end, they all had to go together, because Ilian was very persistent. No one could refuse him. He nestled comfortably in his father's strong, masculine arms, and they were incredibly similar to each other. When Rosina saw them together, her heart was filled with warmth, and anyone could tell that they were truly father and son. The carriage stopped near a famous shop of Rilo's called Failor. The young man said that it was necessary to take measurements for Rosina's clothes. The heroine saw women's clothing on the table here. Could she really find something for a baby here? They were greeted by a smiling employee of the studio who turned to the lady and asked if the clothes would need to be sewn for her. The prince planned to order several sets for his future wife, and the lady asked what fabric she preferred. He asked to order all the premium fabrics, but Rosanna didn't even say anything about needing any clothes. The young man admitted that soon she would be frequently attending official events, and he could not send his wife to a social battle like a knight without armor, where all eyes would be on her. She was even ready to pay for the dress, but the prince categorically refused, and he certainly couldn't take the money from his wife. The heroine sighed. This man knew how to deprive her of words, and she had no choice but to agree. The lady brought out a catalog with the most popular designs of today so that she could look carefully at all the dresses. Looking at the pictures, she noticed that fashion had changed a lot in 7 years, and the clothes she was wearing were long out of fashion. The basic and uncomfortable stuffy designs seemed to remain the same, but Astana-style clothes were much more beautiful and comfortable, so the lady decided to order a custom design. She suggested going into another room, and the lady promised to return soon and asked her husband to choose clothes for the baby. Father and son were incredibly similar in character, and often the third prince behaved like a little boy, just like his son. The kid said his mother was worried that he had no money, but he asked him not to worry and to make sure that his mother did not spend a penny. So today the boy decided to choose all the clothes he liked and pointed out many outfits. The prince understood more and more every day that it would certainly be very difficult to have 2 children, but he was ready to do everything for this boy. Rosina carefully examined the expensive fabrics, assessing their quality in order to sew a beautiful, comfortable dress for herself. She settled on one dark blue fabric that was the color of Yaren's eyes, and she really liked it. This soft and comfortable fabric would be perfect for little Ilian's pants. In the silence of the studio, filled with the rustle of fabric and the muffled hum of sewing machines, voices were heard. The last thing she wanted to do was run into these people she had so desperately fled from, leaving behind her title, her luxury, and the stifling shackles of regulations. The familiar, commanding, arrogant voices of her mother, the former countess, and her unloved sister Rania. They were standing behind her, and there was no chance of remaining unnoticed. Rosina felt everything inside her go cold, and she slowly turned around, trying to maintain at least the appearance of calm. Her mother, in her signature dark blue velvet suit, fixed a piercing, cold gaze on her, and her sister stood next to her. When the former countess saw her, she couldn't believe that her daughter had gone out to an elite store in such old clothes, and she felt incredibly ashamed of her. Looking at the girl's appearance, she admitted that life probably wasn't as easy as she thought after she left home. The two of them looked at their relative, who had long since left the ill-fated family, and seemed to expect something from her. Marcella was slowly starting to get angry and asked if she was really going to just stand there and say absolutely nothing to the family she hadn't seen for so long. The former countess stated that her daughter ran away without taking any responsibility, and she has the right to call her a disgrace to the family. Rosina didn't expect anything good from them. They continued to hate her even after many years, and it was clearly noticeable. From the moment she decided to stay in the empire, it was inevitable, and she decided not to get involved in stupid squabbles until the baby saw it. Suddenly she felt a man's hand on her shoulder, that very support and encouragement that was now her only one. Yaron approached her. He noticed the bride's worried face and realized that something had clearly happened here. He appeared at the most opportune time. The heroine breathed a sigh of relief, because now she was not alone against these two unfortunate ladies. She could not hide her fear and despair, and the young man immediately asked what was going on here. She couldn't even find the right words, and the former countess was indignant. They said her daughter was marrying the third prince, but now a stranger was standing in front of her. Marcella certainly didn't expect to hear this handsome, fair-haired young man call himself her husband. The former countess did not believe his words, considering them to be pure nonsense, because everyone said that the third prince was insane and ugly. She believed any stupid gossip, and looking into her eyes, the young man confessed that he was that very third prince, her future husband. She was used to being obeyed without question, but this man, with his composure and willpower, made her doubt. Now her daughter intervened in the conversation and brazenly asked the young man if he wasn't ashamed to lie so brazenly to his face. The former countess immediately shut her mouth. She clearly saw a blonde man with light hair in front of her, and he was definitely from the royal family. She realized that no one had ever seen the third prince. Only strange rumors had circulated, and she definitely couldn't risk something uncertain. Marcella bowed before him and confessed that she did not recognize His Highness the third prince, and now she had to pretend to be noble. The lady said she would like to talk a little with her daughter and asked if she had read the letter that had recently been sent to her. But Rosina knew nothing about the letter that the former countess sent to the royal palace, asking her to return to the baron's family. Her eyes shone with greed, wanting to take more, and the cheap jewelry, hanging in an overly vulgar manner, was completely out of keeping with her status. 7 whole years had already passed, but the former countess and her daughter still hadn't changed, and their desires were still obvious. The lady was young at the time. She could not distinguish between impudent, burning cunning and love, and now she realized that they just wanted to use her to enter the royal family. This time she was not ready to let them mock her again, and she could not let the baby and the prince go through what she had gone through. The lady replied that she would contact them soon, and perhaps they would be able to see each other later, but the sister was surprised that they really wanted to just kick them out like that. They were still thinking about the story of the third prince's bed, and it seemed that their negligent daughter actually lived without a penny, and the prince walked around without valuable jewelry. The little sister turned out not to be going to stop there, and asked what Rozanov was doing in such a famous place. This was the most famous salon in the capital, and could her stupid little sister really have decided to drop in there just by chance? At that moment, a dressmaker's employee came out and brought a bill for all the outfits that the prince had ordered. She had a stack of papers in her hands, and the prince was interested in how much they had to pay for all the orders. Buying just one item in such an expensive clothing store already makes your hands tremble, and the former countess and her daughter did not expect to see a huge, long list. The price for everything was 98,000 florins, a huge sum that made their eyes widen. The heroine thought this was the price for the house in which she used to live with the baby, and she would probably have to add a little gold to pay the bill. In front of the former countess, Yaron handed the lady a gold banknote and asked her to send all the goods to the specified address. Rarely did anyone in the studio place orders for such a huge amount, and the lady thanked the gentleman, asking him to wait a little. All this time they watched closely as the prince paid, and Marcella could not resist calling Rosina by name. They wanted to make money again, and Marcella even asked to pay for her beloved sister's dresses. It seemed that even Rosina herself did not expect such impudence from a family she had not seen for many years. She was even surprised and asked why she should do this, and she had not been in any relationship for a long time. and she was no longer the silly little girl who had done their errands, and she firmly replied that she was not going to pay for anything. The former countess was angry such behavior, after her family had supposedly been waiting for her for a long time, was simply imperturbable. Marcella stated that she had been foolish to think that she had changed, and that if she had thought about her family even a little bit in the first place, she would not have left them and run away. And even now she asked her daughter to look at herself, who allegedly humiliated them by skimping on the price of one dress, calling her selfish. Hearing the harsh words, the prince could not tolerate such an attitude towards his future wife. She asked him with her eyes not to be angry, because the baby was right there and he saw everything. He saw how his mother was getting upset, and how her mother was yelling at the whole studio. The heroine should not have remained silent. She repeated the words of the former countess about family, about money, and about selfish attitude. And she asked if she really meant herself when she said all this, and a scandal was growing between them right now. Rosina could not control herself. She declared that she no longer wanted to consider the woman who tried to sell her own daughter for money as a mother. It was unlikely that her mother would have been able to respond to this, because it was absolutely true. The lady asked to buy the dress for them themselves, and admitted that she was tired of being treated cruelly, and that they only saw her as a source of money. Rania and her mother did not expect that the previously timid Rosina could say even one word against them. It was obvious that they had better leave here, because there was no point in talking about anything with these people. The young man picked up the boy in his arms, they left the studio, and finally, this horror was over. They heard strange screams outside the door. Something had clearly happened to the dress of the former countess and her daughter. Rosina wanted to leave here as soon as possible. Yaran asked if she really wanted to go back and find out what happened. And her son's hand was covered in green paint, and she asked in surprise what was on his hand. The kid laughed and said that the saleswoman gave him paint to match the color of his clothes, and that it was really cool. Perhaps this was not something to play with, and the mother carefully wiped her son's hand, and fortunately, only the hand was dirty. It was a special paint for fabric, and if it got on it, it would be impossible to wash it off. But the baby was glad that he managed to get revenge. The meeting turned out to be unexpected, unpleasant, and made an impression on Rosina and her future husband. The lady was worried. She felt she had behaved inappropriately in front of him and asked for forgiveness. There should not be such conversations between spouses, and the young man in no way saw her as guilty. He understood that her past life had probably left an indelible mark on the young girl's heart, and it was difficult to forget. So he tried to support her and said that she was simply magnificent in this situation, and he himself would like to have such confidence. In fact, he also decided to apologize because he had one little secret that she didn't know about. It turned out that the young man hid the letter sent by the former countess and said nothing about it. He vaguely knew that the lady had run away from home due to a family conflict and thought she would be angry if she read this letter. And in fact, he was also afraid that she might return to her past terrible life, in which there was only pain and disappointment. Rosina thanked him for his concern, but asked him not to hide anything anymore, because there should be sincerity in a relationship. Since in the future they will become spouses, people living side by side, they should not have secrets from each other. The baby couldn't even understand what kind of situation was happening now, because he didn't even know anything about his mother's past life. The lady's attention was attracted by something, and the prince suggested that they take a slow stroll and buy everything else they needed. She looked away with admiring eyes and asked if they really had time for this, and she really wanted to go somewhere. Seeing her delighted face, the young man realized that this would really help her to distract herself, and they definitely had time for everything. It was a cozy little shop with sweets, and like a magnet, the display case, decorated with delicious cakes, attracted her gaze. Yaran bought her a chocolate slice of cake, and Rosina enjoyed it with delight, each piece melting in her mouth, leaving a trail of bitter cocoa and vanilla. The atmosphere of the candy shop was filled with coziness and warmth, as if it had been created especially for the two of them. The heroine really missed the Empire's messengers. She spent a lot of time outside, and these desserts here were special. Looking, she laughed and admitted that he couldn't even imagine how much she craved these sweets when she was pregnant. The prince bravely decided to buy her some more things so that she could enjoy them in the palace. Suddenly, the lady said that she would like to talk to him about something, and it was probably a serious conversation. She was afraid it might look impolite, but she inquired about the financial state of the palace before the wedding. She had already bought herself a lot of clothes and was very worried, she was scared, because it was all too expensive. Her budget was reduced because her sister and mother used her wealth while she was away, so she needed to know if he was receiving support from the imperial family and if they would have to raise the child. Only the prince knew that the imperial family had not been helping him for a long time, and that in reality everything was different. The blood and skins of slain monsters help him save a lot of money, and this is the only way he makes money. The Empress strictly forbade him to tell, and if it turns out that he obeys the monsters, everything will be very bad. She warned that she would cut off anyone who would contribute to its spread without a second thought. It would be dangerous if he told the whole truth to Rosina, and he wondered what he should do. Rosina saw his excitement and asked him not to be afraid, not to lie, because he said that they were a couple and could tell each other everything. As part of the royal family's duties, there were things he had to keep secret. So the young man admitted that he travels often and earns a lot of money, but did not go into details. The prince could not speak about this directly because it was an imperial secret, and he was sure she would understand him. When they first met, he was wounded, and the heroine wondered if this had anything to do with the case. He made it clear that he could not tell the imperial secrets so that she would be safe. He happily announced that he would like her to manage the finances of their palace in the future. The young man always had money, but he didn't know how to spend it wisely, so he always neglected the mansion and now asked her for help. He saw her as a responsible person, and the lady enthusiastically promised to try to do her best. She understood that he was ready to entrust her with a great responsibility, the financial matters of the entire mansion. And she certainly couldn't let down the only person who gave her new life and a child. The prince smiled and admitted that he was counting on her help and trusted her completely. There were still a variety of sweets left on the table, and the heroine was surprised that he didn't want to try anything. Just being in this place full of sweet smells was already breathtaking, and the prince took the first bite. He couldn't even believe that he had to eat all of this, and sweets had never attracted him before. The one who was most excited was little Ilian, who had never tried anything like this before. He picked up a fork and picked up the largest, most fragrant rose from the chocolate cake. And with a childish smile and carefree attitude, he asked his dad to try this delicious treat. The mother laughed. The baby was a good boy and really cared for his father, and their relationship began to improve. The prince seemed to dislike sweets, and he tried not to breathe, not to chew, and simply swallow the sweets. The kid seemed to notice that his father simply hated sweet treats and came up with something else. He offered to eat the biggest, most delicious and aromatic apple pie, which smelled incredibly of cinnamon throughout the entire store. The hero of history, who one day descended from the sky, taking human form, a great and divine beast. He had a special destiny in store for him in this world, and he came here for a reason. To enrich the world, this man desperately fought monsters, and this was the only meaning of his life. Every day he ate too much with bloodthirsty monsters, and then gathered people and founded an entire empire. Thus he became the first emperor of the empire, and he passed on the ability to his sealings, in whose veins flowed the blood of beasts. The descendant of the divine beast was a charming young man with blonde hair and blue eyes, Crown Prince Siegfried Herbert. Blood is passed down through every generation, and until now, no one has been able to find a solution to see if this can be fixed. Perhaps the mysterious rose will be the answer to the most troubling questions, and only it can help a person with animal blood. In mythology, the rose always follows the divine beast, even on the coat of arms of the empire, on souvenirs in shops. Until now, the red rose has been used as a symbol, but no one knows what exactly it means and what meaning it carries. Yaran was Siegfried's brother, a low-born man, and it seems he became much stronger after taking this rose. And as soon as the young man managed to find out about this, he desperately wanted to get this rose by any means necessary. For a long time he searched for answers to his questions, but he couldn't even imagine what that rose should look like. And if he knew, he would have stolen it long ago. Perhaps it is food, or an item that can be worn as a necklace, or it really is a flower. Siegfried was constantly looking for answers in books, and today the Empress Mother approached him, asking for his attention. She stated that he should not be present at the wedding of this illegitimate child, and his mere presence was an insult to the family. The Empress admitted that they say the essence of many things disappears, but she could not believe where he got this child from. Siegfried did not yet know that his brother had brought a woman and a child with him, and they were going to get married. This guy who didn't care about girls was now going to get married, and he couldn't believe it. As soon as the Empress uttered these words, he began to wonder if the very Rose he had been searching for so many years could really be a living person. A noble cook named Richer was a pastry chef, and he occupied an important role on the stage of life. His goal was to make desserts that make others smile and rejoice, and he dedicated his entire youth to perfecting his baking skills. Unfortunately, he didn't have the funds to open a bakery, so he signed a contract with his evil boss. He spent his entire life as a slave, making sweets all day and night and working tirelessly. And then one day a lady smiled at him and praised the desserts, which were incredibly delicious and impossible to tear yourself away from. It all happened in this cozy little shop. Rosina decided to express her gratitude to the pastry chef. The man started his career to see smiles like this, but at some point, making desserts became a misfortune for him. The ruthless manager, made of money, continued to insist on reducing the size of desserts and also bought cheap ingredients. For a long time, Richer was planning to quit, and suddenly a young man came and asked if he had any intention of working in the imperial palace. Richer had long since fallen into despair and did not even expect that such an offer could appear in his life. The prince realized that the confectioner had signed a lifelong contract full of debts, and he offered to pay all the fees to cancel these conditions. Richer couldn't believe his luck and even thought that this man was just laughing at him. The prince suggested that he make desserts that weren't too sweet, otherwise they wouldn't succeed, and without thinking, he rushed to pack his things. The wedding is scheduled to take place in 2 weeks, and time has flown by quite quickly in the hustle and bustle of preparation. The palace had changed so much that Rosina hardly recognized it, and even a room had been prepared for her and the baby. They hired experts in all fields. Yaren was very busy preparing for the wedding, and she was learning the etiquette of the empire because she was away for a long time. And finally, the long-awaited moment arrived. People with a huge box appeared in front of the mansion's door. The lady looked out the window and saw an incredibly snow-white bow adorning her. Happiness shone in the eyes of these people, and not only the heroes, but also all the servants rejoiced at this holiday. Many were worried that the dress would not arrive on time. It took a long time, and when everyone saw the luxurious wedding dress, they were simply shocked. The dress was hanging on a mannequin, and the maid asked the mistress to go to bed early because she had a lot to do tomorrow. She was left alone in the room with the magnificent wedding dress hanging on the mannequin and could not take her eyes off it. What the heroine had not realized because of her busy life now came to mind: could this wedding really take place? Her son came into the room and asked if she was really planning to get married, because until the last moment he thought that something would change. The little boy, with tears in his eyes, wanted to tell her something and confessed that if his mother married this man, everything would be different. His voice was shaking. He was very worried because he understood that their life would never be the same again. For the little boy, this was a huge experience, and the heroine understood his feelings perfectly. But this was the only right step to ensure that the baby of royal blood could live in safety. The heroine got married to protect her child and believed that he should never be harmed. She looked tenderly into his eyes and admitted that she always wanted to have a family, and he was the main part of it. Large tears rolled down his cheeks, leaving wet tracks on his chubby cheeks. Ilian didn't want a friend or care. He wanted everything to be like before: his mother, him, and their cozy little house, where they both read stories before bed. He knew that soon a new chapter would begin in his little child's life. The mother hugged her son tightly and said that with this marriage all people will know that he is her beloved son, and she is his mother. And no matter what others say, he will forever remain her beloved son, whom she loves incredibly. The little kid asked a rather adult question: does she really like this man? And really, he just wanted her to be happy, not do it for someone else. Looking at her with sincere eyes, he asked her again if she felt happiness when she was next to this man. Most of the time, the children's eyes see the truth. Ilian never once called the prince daddy, and it was as if he knew that she did not consider him her husband. But she was happy to have a family and asked the boy not to cry. The door, everything will be fine. Rosanna admitted that thanks to her baby and father, she had seen quite a lot in this life and took this issue very seriously. And she whispered in his ear that she loved her baby much more than anyone else in this life. Of course it was their little secret. She wiped away his tears, and Ilian finally began to slowly calm down. She laughed and said that she thought the baby was already quite big. He still continues to cry. Only in her arms did he calm down, and his mother carefully suggested that he go to bed, because tomorrow was a very important day. Ilian fell asleep in her arms, his small body relaxed, his trembling eyelashes hovering on his damp cheek. He finally calmed down, comforted by his mother's closeness and the quiet whispers of promises that everything would be okay. Rosina kissed the baby, inhaling his sweet, milky scent, and remembered how she raised Ilian. These moments were woven from happiness and anxiety, from endless love and boundless care. She saw him smile for the first time, how hesitantly he took his first steps. The first time she held him in her arms, it was a special, incomparable tenderness. A small, helpless bundle, completely dependent on her. She remembered how afraid she was of harming him, how carefully she verified every movement, how she froze over his cradle, listening to his quiet breathing. These memories were her treasure, protection from the cruel world. They helped her not to break down and gave her the strength to move forward for the sake of this little person. And now, kissing the sleeping Ilian, she promised herself to do everything possible to make him happy and to make his childhood filled with love and joy. The wedding day was woven from excitement and tenderness, barely touching the skin with tassels. The maid created magic, transforming an ordinary face into the radiant face of a bride. Every stroke, every touch is a mystery of transformation, preparation for a new stage of life. The lady, dressed in a lace peignoir, sat in front of the mirror, entrusting her dreams to the skillful hands of her maid. Rosina looked like a queen. It seemed that everything around froze, enchanted by her beauty. The ivory dress, embroidered with silver threads and pearls, fit her figure perfectly, emphasizing her noble posture and thin waist. Even the maids, who had seen many noble persons in their time, could not contain their admiring sighs. Looking in the mirror, Rosina asked what magic had been cast on her, and she had never seen herself so magnificent in her life. The ballroom was incredibly decorated, and it suited the image of the young bride. Rosina did not see it, and the prince said that it would be a secret for her. She stood on the threshold of a new life, preparing to become a royal princess, while the maids discussed the magnificent wedding and the huge number of guests. Who will be next to her? The hated Star-Out family, and her beloved father left her long ago. The guests were announced the arrival of a magnificent bride, the future wife of the famous third prince. In this sea of faces, Rosina was looking for one, a dear, loving one, the one that always gave her confidence and support. The father who was supposed to hold her hand when she walked out in her wedding dress would never be by her side again. Today she so missed his words of encouragement, his blessing, his strong hug. And instead, the former countess and her daughter sat at the family table, while her real family had long since left. The hall contained the royal family who had rejected her husband and many other guests. The nobles who encouraged the fall of the count's family, and the relatives who turned their backs on her and secretly hated her. They were all in the same room, watching the wedding ceremony, and she felt every one of their glances. And now this is her new life, but she knew, Rose, that she should not lose heart in front of everyone. She walked to the altar, trying not to show her emotions. Memories of her father haunted her, filling her heart with longing and light sadness. As she approached the altar, she looked at Yaron, and in his eyes she saw warmth and support, the strength that could perhaps help her cope with any loss. Her eyes reflected so many emotions: hope, love, a slight fear of the unknown. He had been waiting for this moment for a long time, and now that it had finally arrived, Yaron felt a little confused. The moment froze as the priest began his speech, filled with wisdom and love. He said that today heaven blesses this wedding. The newlyweds stand in front of each other and are grateful to the Empire for blessing this marriage. The moment she looked into his blue eyes, the tension dissipated and her heart began to beat faster. Rosina still didn't believe that these were her sincere feelings, and she remembered the night when they first met. Because of those blue eyes, those dangerous animal eyes, she still felt danger just as she had 7 years ago. She felt a force that shook her feelings and destroyed her mind, and she could not believe that there was a place for sincerity here. The first word was given to the prince, and the priest asked if he was ready to promise lifelong devotion to his bride. Without hesitation, Yaron answered in agreement, looking into the eyes of his future wife. The next one to answer was she, Rosina, who still did not believe in their marriage. The priest spoke of a lifelong vow that must be given in sincerity and prudence, but for her it was just a lie. The priest's assistant held up the wedding rings so that the newlyweds could seal their vows. Yaren carefully took the ring and placed it on Rosina's finger, the golden decoration, the thread of fate, wrapped around her delicate finger, sparkling in the candlelight. The ring was a symbol of their union, a sign of eternal fidelity and devotion. Rosina felt a light touch of metal through her glove, and warmth spread throughout her body. But despite all the circumstances, Yaren refused to believe that there was nothing real between them. Yaren kissed her hand. Even despite the false marriage, the light touch of his lips left behind a strange sensation, a mixture of cold and warmth, bitterness and hope. Rosina glanced timidly at the ring that was to become the symbol of their family life. She carefully placed it on her husband's finger, and that was the final step to seal the vow. The priest pronounced them husband and wife, and at last it was all over, but the lady forgot that vows always end with a kiss. She knew the purpose, she understood the necessity, but the thought of Yaren's touch filled her with a strange mixture of trepidation. He was her partner, her ally in this complex game, but nothing more the pretense had to seem true. But how could this be achieved when the heart refused to obey the mind? That's it, it's going to happen now. She has no time left to hesitate. Perhaps it was simple excitement before the upcoming test, or fear of the unknown, or maybe something else that she was afraid to admit to herself. Yaren's touch on her hand, light, almost accidental, caused a strange tremor in her. He carefully touched her ears and kissed her until she felt that this was not her will, this was not her desire. The bouquet fell from her hands, remaining on the marble floor until, many years later, he touched her again. After the ceremony, there was a magnificent party, and everything was too luxurious. All the guests loved the wedding, and many hadn't seen such a large crowd for a long time. The two men approached the other, and one admitted that he had not seen him at the party before, but he could not sit still, and this was the only chance to see the third prince in person. Many were here for the same reason. It was unexpected. Contrary to all the rumors, he looked good. The daughter of one of the men could not take her eyes off him, saying that he was the most handsome member of the royal family she had ever seen. The bride also did not go unnoticed, but none of the noble ladies even imagined who she was. In fact, when the ladies heard that the third prince was getting married, they thought he had found a rich family with high status. This girl probably doesn't even have money to take care of herself, and no one understood why he chose her. Noble ladies with high titles were not afraid to discuss her right at the wedding and cast selfish glances when the lady came out with her husband. Everyone held their breath and saw in front of them a couple that was definitely impossible not to talk about. The third prince, who was known for his strange appearance, but he looked flawless, and next to him was a red-haired lady in an unusual dress. There was a wedding ceremony in the morning, a grand feast in the afternoon, and Rosina was so busy all day that she never even saw her son. She was incredibly tired, and now she would have to spend time with these nobles who looked like vicious hyenas. Everyone was looking at her intently, and she looked at her husband, hoping to find approval. He held her hand, and she couldn't understand why everyone was looking at her like that, and whether her outfit was really that strange. The heroine made it in the design voiced by Yaren, but for some reason everyone in the room even stopped talking when she left. Marcella admitted that her dress is simply beautiful, even though it is indeed radically different from current fashion. He understood that she would be constantly discussed behind her back, and this was not at all surprising. The first to approach them was a respectable gentleman who decided to personally congratulate the newlyweds on this grand event. The guests parted for him, allowing him to pass, and this meant that this man had a rather high title. The gentleman in the black velvet suit congratulated Yaren on his wedding, while all the guests looked at him in amazement. And the young man thanked His Royal Highness, the Crown Prince, who decided to come to the wedding in person. Rosina realized that the man standing before them was the very same man, the Crown Prince, the only legitimate son of the Empress. He exuded arrogance and power, haughtiness, and was radically different from his illegitimate brother. Rosina politely stated her name and expressed her utmost respect to the Royal Highness, as befits etiquette. He offered his hand and admitted that he was very glad to meet such a magnificent person. Siegfried looked at Rosina strangely. He squeezed her hand when they met, and she felt it. It wasn't physical pain, no, the sensation was different. disturbing, like a light electric shock running through the body. His handshake was unexpectedly strong, but not aggressive. Rather, it was probing, an attempt to penetrate her outer shell, to discern the essence. Her presence at the castle for the fake wedding was an ominous omen, a dark cloud hanging over the fragile house of their deception. She felt his gaze burning right through her, as if he knew everything, saw through the mask of the happy bride, and was only waiting for the right moment. The next second, he came to his senses and pretended that everything was perfectly fine, finally letting go of her hand. And at that moment, Siegfried realized that he had in fact just found what he had been looking for all these long years, as soon as he touched her hand. He clenched his fist tightly behind his back, realizing that this was the very rose that would help him get rid of his animal rage. The young man reported that he had heard of a lady from the noble Earl family of Starout, which he knew about. The guests whispered whether this meant that their marriage had been approved by the palace, and whether the position was that they would no longer expel this family. Continuing to look at Rosina, he invited her to have a cup of tea with him soon. Since they were now a family, he wanted to talk to him, and Yaren immediately declared that he would definitely come too. Siegfried was not averse to having a deep conversation with his family for the first time in a long time, and promised to send someone to their palace soon. Yaren knew his half-brother had never been family to him, and perhaps he was up to something. The gentleman bowed before the girl and promised that they would see each other soon, and that they would have another chance to talk. After he left, Yaren asked if the lady was okay, because he noticed that she looked a little strange. She replied that the gentleman had acted so unexpectedly that she was a little surprised, but she clearly felt a frightening feeling inside. Yaren was also sure that this man would not come to his wedding, and his appearance sent an incredible wave of anger through him. The nobles who had been avoiding conversation out of fear of the palace began to approach one by one, and it seemed that one word from the royal prince was very powerful. Everything would have been too rosy if the little sister had not appeared in sight and turned to Rosina. Taking advantage of the moment, surrounded by young men, she loudly declared that the third prince was her own sister. Even today, she got it here. Yaren offered to intervene, but the heroine thought that it was her direct responsibility. Rania introduced the nobles who wanted to greet their sister, and it was a great honor for them to meet her. Even her mother admitted that her daughter looks truly beautiful today, and they say that a woman is beautiful in what she wears. They started discussing a proper wedding, fresh food and beautiful flowers, but didn't seem to suggest much effort. All these words were just a false lie, and the princess did not even want to pay attention to them, much less respond. She turned around and simply walked away without saying anything to her sister or her mother, in front of everyone. The man was surprised. The lady said that they were sisters, and she acted as if they didn't know each other at all. Therefore, the former countess could not restrain herself. She took her daughter by the hand and asked why she allowed herself to be so rude. It was her wedding, a formal occasion, and she didn't care at all what her spiteful mother and sister thought of her. Rosina stated that her mother was behaving badly in front of the royal family, and she should have greeted her husband and her properly. And it was she who showed rudeness towards them, not following the rules of etiquette. Marcella trembled and could not believe that it was really her daughter standing in front of her, and not the timid girl she knew. The mother was sure that this girl had inherited her father's stupidity, and asked the princess for forgiveness for her inappropriate behavior. In response to this, the lady turned to her sister and asked if her husband knew about this behavior. The man, a nobleman, whose arm she was holding, was surprised that the lady was married and said nothing about it. It was a cruel truth that could not be kept silent about. It could not be hidden, and she was confident in her actions early on. They were finally getting what they deserved, and she was no longer going to play the games of people who only wanted money from her. The lady stated that the family's behavior at her wedding had reached such a level that she could not understand her head in front of the guests of honor. In a loud voice, she asked them to never appear before her again, and she did not live to see them in her life anymore. Rosina warned that if the former countess and her daughter were rude again, she would call security and simply throw them out of the event. Her answer was worthy. For many years her mother and daughter had mocked her, and there was nothing human about them. Rosina felt relieved after so many years of trying to deceive herself, trying to be good for them. Her hands were shaking, but at that moment Yaren gently touched her hand, giving her that very support. He shouldn't have gotten involved in family squabbles, but he joked. It was so scary that even he was scared. Rosina understood that she had to be shown to the nobility she didn't have a very good relationship with her mother, and she was afraid that the family might do something. She said that her mother used her father to take money. Something similar had happened before, but now it was all in the past. A new life was beginning, without family ties, without the terrible mother and her daughter, and now everything was fine. She looked at her husband with joy and admitted that she would never allow him and her baby to go through something like this. Initially, this marriage was fictitious, but she believed that they could be happy for the sake of the child. She understood that happiness doesn't come easy. You have to fight for it, for them, for Ileana's sake. Ladies approached her, admiring the celebration. They congratulated the newlyweds and were no longer afraid to talk to Rosina. Others debated whether she was truly of low birth and whether she had a very refined accent and impeccable manners. One of the girls knew that the lady was making her debut in her home and was visiting the capital for the first time. The third prince doesn't even allow his wife to lift a plate so that she doesn't hurt her wrists, and everyone envies such care. Moreover, the guests were surprised at how beautiful the third prince's appearance was, even though dirty rumors had been circulating about him for many years. The girls' hearts began to thaw from the gossip, and before them they saw a happy love story. Many understood that being on good terms with this couple would not hurt at all, and perhaps this would become a new trend in society. Suddenly, silence reigned in the hall. Everyone fell silent and looked at the second floor. Rosina and her husband stood with their backs to the balcony, but she immediately felt that all the guests were looking intently at someone. She felt someone's gaze on her, and she knew she should turn around and see what was going on. It was as if a dark aura had darkened the entire luxurious hall at that moment when the heroine turned around and saw her. The Empress herself stood on the balcony, looking intently at her illegitimate son and the girl standing next to him. She didn't even come up to congratulate them and looked at them with a haughty, cold gaze. This was the same woman who was furious and desperately hated her husband, and she would continue to despise her as well. One could not expect love, support, or blessing from the Empress, and she was no different from her own mother. Only because she had much more power, and the lady quietly whispered, "The bride's dress is real vulgarity." Rosina continued to watch her go without fear when the lady gave her a cold look, turned around and simply walked away. Night finally fell. The heroes arrived at the third prince's palace, and the heroine couldn't feel her legs at all from wearing heels for so long. As she got out of the carriage, she stumbled from fatigue, and Yaren grabbed her by the waist. His strong arms wrapped around her, and for a moment Rosina felt safe, as if the storm had died down, leaving behind only a gentle breeze. The young man asked with a smile if she had drunk too much that she could not stand on her feet at all. The lady made no protest, but the pink blush on her cheeks made it clear that she simply wanted to relax on this wonderful day. Rosina felt the warmth of his hands, the scent of his cologne, the beating of his heart, which matched her own. They were walking down the hallway after the wedding ceremony. The lady was falling over every 5 minutes, which meant she had really had too much to drink. She laughed and admitted that it seemed like she had been so tense before that she hadn't even noticed she was drunk. She laughed loudly throughout the entire corridor, and Yaren saw her so relaxed for the first time and wanted to know why she was smiling all the time. She hadn't seen her beloved son all day, and as they walked together, the young man realized how incredibly lucky he was to have such a wonderful mother. The lady wanted to fall asleep hugging her beautiful child, but today such luck should belong only to her husband. They passed the baby's room and stopped at the door until the lady realized what kind of room it was. This was their new shared bedroom, where, according to tradition, the newlyweds were required to spend the night together after the wedding. Rosina completely forgot that such a rule existed, and in an instant she seemed to sober up. The bedroom was incredibly luxurious, but the lady still didn't understand why they now had to sleep in the same place. From today on, they officially became legal spouses, and they must respect and honor these traditions. The lady was outraged the conditions she set did not concern this, since they were not even real spouses. But the young man also had his own conditions, and had she really completely forgotten what they had agreed on earlier? They have to pretend to be a good couple, that they love each other more than anything in the world, that they are happy, and if they sleep in different rooms from the first night, it will arouse suspicion. Of course, this was true, but Rosina was afraid to be left alone all night, because who knows what might happen to them. The prince warned her not to worry and that he was not going to do anything about what had once happened between them. Rosina became embarrassed and apologized, and she did not at all want to think of him as such a person, but he understood everything perfectly. He simply suggested that they sit down and have a glass of wine together, and he didn't want her to feel awkward at all. There was an expensive, sweet, low-alcohol wine on the table, and it was the very wine she loved. Cheese, fruit, delicious treats, and in all the prince's actions one could feel a pleasant care towards her. He didn't demand anything from her, and simply wanted to spend time alone, making it clear that she should never be afraid of him again. They took a sip of wine. Rosina knew she needed to thank him for his close attention. The next moment, the aura in the room seemed to change, and the heroine clearly felt danger. She pushed her husband as far away as she could, screaming at him to be careful because something strange was going on here. The arrowhead touched her shoulder. No one could understand what was happening here and how she managed to foresee it. At that strange, incomprehensible moment, they found themselves too close, and the lady touched his chest. Looking at the wall, they saw an arrow that had somehow just entered the room. If it weren't for her, the arrow would have flown straight at the prince, and she had just saved him from being wounded. There were armed men outside, about 4 of them, and was this really an attack again? The prince was surprised that she had been able to foresee the arrow flying in, and remembered one little thing she had told him. Once upon a time, a lady said that she heard the voices of animals that always warned her of danger. Surprisingly, he remembered her abilities, and so many years had passed, but he remembered every little detail. The prince realized that they were both in danger, and that the empress had probably sent someone to kill him again. So he always kept his sword with him and shouted loudly for Rosina to immediately go to the bedroom and find a safe place. The sound of a broken window was heard in the room, and 2 men in black clothes flew into the room, who were clearly sent for reprisals. Yaron, with his sword, blocked Rosina's path, preparing to attack. The blade, forged in ancient forges, sparkled in the torchlight, turning into living silver. The fictitious nature of the wedding receded, giving way to real danger, a mortal threat. His movements became less confident, his breathing became ragged, and now the sword was near the throat of one of the villains. The young man did not want the girl to see him like this, his true animal rage, his appearance. The man shouted to his partners what was going on and ordered them to immediately take the woman hostage. But her safety was at stake, and a wild, all-consuming rage washed over the third prince, and he could no longer control it. His hand held the sword tightly. He was no longer a man. He was a bloodthirsty beast protecting his family. He moved with the grace of a predator, swirling in a deadly dance, parrying blows, inflicting crushing wounds. They had no chance to cope with Yaron's power, his primal bestial nature. Their blades, which had seemed so formidable in the beginning, were now only pitiful attempts to stop the inevitable. The rage that gripped him gave him superhuman strength, and a bestial ferocity flashed in his eyes. The first attacker was subdued, the rest rushed in, as they were following the Empress's orders, and they had to kill him. He moved like a whirlwind, sweeping away everything in his path. Rosina froze. Watching what was happening instead of fear, she felt a strange admiration. There remained the last attacker, whom the prince looked straight in the eyes, without a single shadow of doubt or regret. The man didn't understand who was standing in front of him and where he got such inhuman strength from, because even the 3 of them couldn't do anything. The killer was left alone. He called Yaron a monster while there were drops of blood on his face. Blood, thick and scarlet, slowly flowed down the sword, turning into a bizarre crimson pattern on the floor. He was breathing heavily, his chest rising and falling in a frantic rhythm, like an old blacksmith's furnace. The air was thick with the smell of iron and fear, the smell of death that made his teeth ache. He was him again, the bloodthirsty monster. But now he was not alone. Now he heard her voice next to him, which made the animal cruelty weaken and come to human feelings. The lady stood next to him, calling him by name, trembling all over and asking if he could hear her voice. The prince's hands dropped to his sword, his hands forever stained with blood. Would he ever be able to wash them clean? He looked around. There were 4 attacking killers lying around. Everything was covered in blood, and this was the most terrible end to the wedding, and he just wanted Rosina to leave immediately. He shouted at her not to come near him under any circumstances, and he didn't want her to see him like that more than anything in his life. Instead of fear, Rosina hugged him and pressed him to herself, and at that moment, it seemed, all the barriers erected by time and circumstances collapsed. Rosina felt his confusion, but she didn't let go. Her embrace, saturated with despair and hope, seemed to whisper, "We can handle it." In this quiet haven of two hearts, wounded by the past, a faint ray of light flared up, the air filled with unspoken words and hidden desires. Rosina hugged him and immediately felt this strong feeling, this irresistible attraction, just like that very night. An instinct that does not allow him to be left to suffer in such a way when this man has absolutely no control over the blood flowing in his veins. He felt guilty. She should have left and never seen this horror that had just happened. It was not just a merger, but a meeting of two souls who had been searching for each other through the centuries. They looked at each other, distant galaxies and a universe contained in a moment, the kiss a light touch of lips, a flash of electricity that ran through the body. Rosina still believed that it was not her will, not her true desire, but it turned out that she had been wrong all this time. She tried to suppress her true feelings, but every time she felt his touch, she couldn't help but want him so desperately. She wanted him more than anything in the world, and this desire was impossible to resist. Their arms wrapped tightly around each other, like the roots of a tree that had grown into the ground, their hearts beating in unison, creating a rhythm that only the two of them could understand. Yaren's hot kisses touched her body, and she couldn't control herself, her skin flushed under every touch, like a blossoming bud in the rays of the midday sun. Waves of pleasure rolled in one after another, flooding the mind and leaving only an animal, primal attraction. She felt every cell trembling, her pulse quickening, the heat spreading through her veins like lava. It was as if he was casting a spell, touching her with his lips, bringing to life dormant desires that she had never suspected. In this dance of bodies there was no room for doubt, only an uncontrollable thirst and need to be closer, to merge into one. When she opened her eyes, everything inside seemed to be shaking. Everything was agitated, and Rosina didn't even understand where she had fallen asleep the night before. The first thing she saw was Yaren's bare torso, and everything happened exactly the same as during their first meeting. She was scared and couldn't believe that this had really happened again, because she had made a promise to herself first and foremost. She looked at her husband with frightened eyes, and he just wanted her not to worry. An internal scream tore through Rosina. She didn't believe in the reality that was happening, which was too sweet. The lady buried her face in the pillow out of embarrassment. She couldn't contain her emotions and was ready to simply run away from there and never return. Yes, she lost control again and did it. She was sure that now she really had gone crazy, but even Yaren himself promised that he would not do anything like that. He also felt guilty, insisting that it would have been better for him to hold back, but it was no one's fault, and they both wanted it. At that moment, it seemed that all boundaries were crumbling, conventions and prohibitions were disappearing, and only the two of them remained, engulfed in the flames of desire, ready to burn in this fire without a trace.